The rhythmic beep of a fetal heart monitor echoed down the pristine corridor of Denver Memorial Hospital. I stood near the nurse's station reviewing a patient chart on my tablet. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet and routine, until I heard the sharp, rapid strike of designer heels hitting the linoleum. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. Cynthia Kensington approached with the posture of a woman who believed she owned the air she walked through. She wore a cashmere wrap draped over pristine athletic wear. It was the standard uniform of Boulder's elite, an aesthetic designed to signal a life devoted equally to organic wellness and offshore tax shelters. "Evelyn," she said. Her voice carried the tone of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. I closed my tablet and turned slowly. "Hello, Cynthia." It had been exactly 1 year since I signed the divorce papers, 12 months since her son Liam moved his belongings out of our home and into the bed of my former best friend Olivia. Cynthia let her gaze drift over my clinic badge, pausing just long enough to convey pity. "I am surprised they let you consult on the maternity ward," she said, pitching her voice so the passing orderlies could hear. "Given your history." I met her stare. "I go where the science requires me." She smiled, a tight expression she had practiced in a mirror. "Well, you should know Liam is upstairs. We are taking the new baby home today. A boy." She took a step closer, letting the scent of eucalyptus and expensive perfume invade my space. "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made. Now he has a baby boy with your best friend, a biological heir." A normal woman might have slapped her. A normal woman might have broken down right there under the fluorescent lights. But my days are spent analyzing the exact sequence of nucleotides that build human life. I deal in hard data, not theatrics. I offered a calm, unbothered smile. "Is that what you believe, Cynthia?" Her brow furrowed. A hairline crack appeared in her porcelain facade. Before she could formulate a retort, the heavy double doors of the neonatal wing swung open. William Kensington, Cynthia's husband and the patriarch of the Kensington Trust, stepped out. He was a man who usually commanded boardrooms, but right now his shoulders sagged. His skin possessed a sickly, chalky hue. In his right hand, he clutched a sealed hospital envelope bearing the bright red crest of the genetics department. William lifted his head, his eyes locked onto mine. He stopped dead in his tracks. The crisp envelope trembled against his leg. He knew my profession. He knew what kind of tests the family trust required to release the inheritance funds. Cynthia turned, annoyed by her husband's sudden paralysis. "William, what is taking so long? The valet is waiting." William did not look at his wife. He kept staring at me, a silent, desperate panic radiating from his chest. Cynthia's smug grin vanished, replaced by a cold, creeping confusion. The color drained from her cheeks as she watched her untouchable husband shrink under my silent gaze. She did not know yet, but she was about to find out that biology does not care about a bank account. Welcome to Still Drama Stories, where the truth always outlasts the performance. Tell me in the comments, how old are you and where are you watching from? If stories about unmasking hypocrites and letting the facts do the talking resonate with you, hit subscribe. Now let me take you back 3 years to show you how William Kensington ended up sweating in a hospital hallway holding a piece of paper that would destroy his entire bloodline. When I first married Liam, I thought I understood the rules of his world. Colorado specifically, the affluent circles of Denver and Boulder, runs on a very specific kind of currency. It is not just about wealth. It is about proving you are living an enlightened life. Cynthia was the undisputed queen of this ecosystem. She lectured her friends about carbon footprints while chartering private jets to Aspen. She boasted about her family's superior genetics and flawless health history. From the beginning, my career as a genetic consultant was a thorn in her side. To Cynthia, genetics was a status symbol, a way to prove the Kensingtons were inherently better than everyone else. To me, it was a science of probabilities and hard truths. She frequently diminished my work at family gatherings, calling it glorified lab work. I absorbed these insults silently. I chose professional restraint over emotional outbursts because I knew arguing with someone who values image over reality is a waste of breath. The real friction started during my second year of marriage when Liam and I struggled to conceive. The medical appointments piled up and the empty pregnancy tests became a quiet weight in our home. Cynthia did not offer support. She offered subtle, calculated blame. I remember a dinner party she hosted in early autumn. The table was set with crystal and imported linen. 12 guests mostly, William's business partners and their wives, were enjoying their roasted duck. Olivia, my best friend at the time, was seated 2 chairs down, sipping champagne and hanging on to Cynthia's every word. The conversation turned to legacy and grandchildren. Cynthia set her wine glass down and looked directly at me across the table. "It is such a shame," Cynthia sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "But I suppose we have to factor in Evelyn's background. Stress takes a terrible toll on a woman's body, and working-class environments do not always produce the most resilient constitutions." The table went entirely silent. A few guests looked down at their plates. Liam sat beside me cutting his duck, refusing to intervene. He was a man who preferred to let his mother fight his battles so he could keep his hands clean. Olivia offered me a sympathetic pout that I later realized was practiced. I did not throw my drink. I did not storm out. I wiped my mouth with a linen napkin, looked Cynthia in the eye, and smiled. "I find that resilience is often tested most when people have to face things money cannot fix," I said. Cynthia's jaw tightened, but she quickly masked it with a polite laugh. The dinner continued, but the line had been drawn. She needed an heir to unlock the next tier of William's family trust, and she had decided my biology was the obstacle. I filed her cruelty away, documenting her behavior the same way I documented patient symptoms. I did not know then that her obsession with the Kensington bloodline would eventually become the very trap she built for herself. Liam played his part in the charade flawlessly. He presented himself to the Denver social scene as a self-made technology entrepreneur. He wore vintage denim and talked about disrupting industries, but his startup was entirely funded by his father's trust. He played it working while I spent my days in a clinical setting interpreting karyotypes and counseling couples through devastating genetic anomalies. We were living in 2 different realities. I dealt with the fragile, unyielding rules of human biology, and he dealt in optics. Olivia fit right into their world. She came from a similar background, armed with a trust fund, and a degree she never used. We had met in college, bonded over a shared dorm room, but the older we got, the more the wealth gap defined us. When she started showing up to Cynthia's charity galas, in dresses that cost more than my monthly salary, I should have noticed the shift. Olivia wanted the Kensington lifestyle, and Cynthia wanted a daughter-in-law who looked good in photographs and did not challenge her authority. The campaign to replace me began subtly. Cynthia started inviting Olivia to family brunches and excluding me, claiming she thought I was too busy at the clinic. She would leave comments on Olivia's social media posts about how they were cut from the same cloth. All the while, the pressure to produce a Kensington heir grew heavier. The trust fund William managed had a strict biological clause. A portion of the millions would only transfer to Liam upon the birth of a blood relative. For Cynthia, a grandchild was not a person to love. It was a key to a vault. When the fertility treatments yielded no results, the whispers grew louder. Cynthia cornered me in the kitchen during a holiday party holding a plate of organic appetizers. "You know Evelyn," she murmured, ensuring her voice was low enough that Liam could not hear. "Some women are just not built to carry a legacy. It is a biological failing, nothing to be ashamed of. But you really must stop punishing my son for your shortcomings." I looked at her perfectly manicured hands and the smug certainty in her eyes. She had decided the narrative. Evelyn, the broken working-class girl who could not give the Kensington family what they deserved. I did not defend myself. I did not tell her that the human body is not a machine you can buy replacement parts for. I simply nodded and walked out of the kitchen. I stayed silent because my professional training taught me that people will eventually reveal their true pathology if you give them enough rope. I chose to watch the pebbles fall, building a mountain of observation. I noticed how Liam's phone would buzz late at night, and he would place it face down on the nightstand. I noticed how Olivia stopped asking about my clinic work and started asking very specific questions about the Kensington estate in Aspen. I noticed the glances they exchanged when they thought I was looking at the dessert menu. They all believed I was oblivious. They mistook my clinical restraint for stupidity. They thought I was a fragile woman, crumbling under the weight of infertility, slowly being pushed out of the frame so a superior replacement could step in. Cynthia believed she had engineered the perfect upgrade for her son. She had no idea that I already held the genetic blueprints that would tear her entire world apart. 3 years ago, the sky above Aspen was a sharp, clear blue on the day I married Liam. The wedding was a masterclass in Colorado high society posturing. The floral arrangements were sourced from sustainable local farms, yet Cynthia had flown in a private chef from Paris on a chartered jet to prepare the vegan tasting menu. That was the Kensington brand. They performed environmentalism and enlightenment for the cameras, while their actual lives ran on a staggering consumption of resources. I remember standing near the ice sculpture during the reception, shivering in my silk gown watching my new mother-in-law hold court. Cynthia had worn a tailored ivory pantsuit. My own mother, a retired pediatric nurse who drove 12 hours from a modest neighborhood in Arizona to be there, had gently pointed out that wearing white to a son's wedding was a calculated choice. I had brushed it off then, eager to keep the peace. I did not yet understand that keeping the peace with Cynthia meant surrendering your own reality. Liam was the undeniable center of his parents' universe. He was the golden child shielded from every consequence, a man who possessed the unearned confidence of someone who had never paid his own rent. In the early days of our marriage, he opened a tech incubator in downtown Boulder. He called it Vanguard Solutions. The office featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls, reclaimed timber desks, and an expensive espresso machine imported from Italy. Liam spent his days attending networking brunches, wearing sustainable wool sweaters, and pitching vague concepts about disrupting the renewable energy sector. He spoke in hollow buzzwords, charming local investors with a smile he inherited from his father. But I managed our household finances, and I saw the bank statements. Vanguard Solutions generated zero revenue. Every quarter, a six-figure wire transfer arrived from the Kensington Family Trust to keep the lights on and the illusion intact. When Liam lost a major client due to his own failure to prepare a basic prospectus, Cynthia invited us to Sunday brunch at her sprawling estate overlooking the Flatirons. She poured mimosa into crystal flutes and immediately rewrote the narrative. She did not hold her son accountable. Instead, she blamed the local economy, the short-sightedness of the client, and the astrological alignment of the month. Liam nodded along, accepting his mother's absolution, without a trace of guilt. I sat across from them, biting my tongue. My days were spent in a sterile clinic sitting across from terrified parents. As a genetic consultant, my job required delivering hard, unyielding truths. I analyzed karyotypes. I explained the lifelong implications of chromosomal anomalies. I held the hands of mothers who had just learned their unborn children would face severe neurological hurdles. My world was defined by the rigid, unforgiving laws of biology. Cynthia despised my profession. To her, science was only useful when it validated her superiority. Real medicine, the kind that delivered bad news, was too gritty for her curated existence. She preferred boutique wellness clinics where wealthy women paid thousands of dollars for vitamin infusions and crystal healing. "It is just such heavy, gloomy work, Evelyn," she told me one afternoon while we sat on her patio. She was sipping a cold-pressed juice that had been shipped overnight in layers of non-recyclable plastic. "Staring at microscopes all day. It is glorified lab work, really. You absorb all that negative energy from sick people. You should transition into something lighter, maybe holistic genetic optimization. People pay a premium to ensure their children have the best traits." I looked at her perfectly smooth forehead, frozen by routine injections, and felt a profound disconnect. "I do not optimize traits, Cynthia. I help families navigate medical realities." She waved a dismissive hand, her diamond rings catching the afternoon sun. "Reality is subjective, darling. We create our own health." That toxic philosophy became the weapon she used against me when the true crisis of our marriage began. A year after the Aspen wedding, the nursery in our home remained empty. The initial excitement of trying to build a family slowly morphed into a quiet clinical routine. The basal body thermometers, the ovulation trackers, the scheduled intimacy that felt more like a chore than an act of love. The monthly arrival of a negative test felt like a quiet door closing in an empty house. Liam withdrew. He spent longer hours at his glass-walled office, avoiding the heavy silence of our home. He did not accompany me to the initial fertility consultations. He claimed he had vital meetings, leaving me to sit alone in waiting rooms, surrounded by couples holding hands. Cynthia, however, stepped into the void. She did not offer a shoulder to cry on. She offered an interrogation. The subtle superiority she had always wielded shifted into targeted, methodical blame. In the Kensington ecosystem, failure was a symptom of poor character, and since Liam was flawless by definition, the biological failing had to belong to me. The microaggressions escalated during a weekend wellness retreat in Telluride, a trip Cynthia had booked under the guise of family bonding. We were sitting in the spa waiting area wrapped in plush robes. The air smelled of lavender and damp stone. Cynthia handed me a brochure for a costly, unregulated herbal cleanse. "You need to detoxify your system, Evelyn," she said, her voice dropping into a register of faux concern. You carry so much tension. I was talking to my acupuncturist, and she agrees that women from certain backgrounds often struggle to conceive. It is the generational trauma. I lowered the cup of herbal tea I was holding. Generational trauma. Well, your mother worked double shifts in a hospital for decades, she said smoothly, adjusting the collar of her robe. You grew up worrying about money. That kind of chronic working-class stress just lingers in the cellular tissue. It elevates cortisol. It creates a hostile environment for new life. The Kensington women, on the other hand, have always been incredibly fertile. Our bloodline is very robust. She smiled, offering the assessment as if she were giving me a helpful piece of real estate advice. She was standing in a luxury spa, casually diagnosing my biology as inferior, blaming my mother's hard work for my empty womb. The instinct to defend myself flared in my chest. I wanted to tell her that my mother's double shifts paid for my education. I wanted to explain that the human reproductive system does not consult a bank account before functioning. I wanted to demand she stop dissecting my body for sport. But I looked at her poised posture and the calculating gleam in her eye. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to raise my voice to become the emotional, unstable woman she had already decided I was. She wanted an audience to witness my lack of refinement so she could comfort her son and tell him he deserved better. I chose professional restraint. In my field, you do not diagnose a patient while they are having a tantrum. You observe the baseline. You gather the data. You wait until the pattern is undeniable. I set the brochure on the glass table between us. I will consult my endocrinologist about the cellular tissue theory, Cynthia. Thank you for the insight. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. My refusal to break deprived her of the victory she craved. But the silence did not protect my marriage. It only gave the infection room to grow. Cynthia returned to Denver and intensified her campaign. She began orchestrating social events that conveniently required my husband to attend without me. She curated guest lists filled with women who fit her ideal mold, women with trust funds, flawless pedigrees, and copious amounts of free time. That was how Olivia transitioned from my college roommate to Cynthia's preferred candidate. Olivia had the right last name, the right zip code, and a desperate desire to belong to the inner circle. While I spent my evenings reviewing patient files and tracking my ovulation cycles, Olivia was drinking martinis with my mother-in-law, listening to exaggerated stories about my supposed fragility. I absorbed the insults. I maintained my clinical detachment, trusting the science of my own body over the cruelty of their whispers. I did not realize that the true betrayal was not happening in the whispered conversations at country clubs. The true betrayal was happening in the digital trails, the location pings, and the quiet hours of the night. I thought I was fighting a biological hurdle, but I was actually standing in the middle of a trap they had been building for months. The truth does not always arrive with a dramatic confession. Sometimes it arrives on a printed receipt left in a coat pocket, setting the stage for a revelation that would shatter the Kensington legacy forever. The truth did not announce itself with a tearful confession or a lipstick stain on a collar. In my experience, deception rarely thrives in the dramatic. It thrives in the mundane. It hides in the digital exhaust we leave behind every single day. I did not catch my husband in bed with my best friend. I caught him in the data. It was a Thursday evening. Liam had told me he was attending a late dinner in downtown Denver with potential investors for his tech incubator. I stayed home reading a clinical journal on chromosomal variations. His iPad was resting on the kitchen island, synced to his primary email account. A notification illuminated the screen. It was a receipt for a luxury rideshare service. I set my journal down and walked over to the island. The receipt detailed a pickup at a high-end sushi restaurant in Denver and a drop-off at a boutique hotel nestled in the foothills of Boulder. The timestamp was 30 minutes prior. I opened a family tracking application we had installed years ago for emergencies. Liam's location icon rested squarely over the hotel. I did not call him. I did not drive to the hotel to pound on the door. I sat back down at the kitchen counter and opened Olivia's social media profile. She had posted a photo of 2 champagne flutes earlier that evening. The background showed the distinct velvet upholstery of that exact sushi restaurant in Denver. The caption read, "Celebrating New Beginnings." I stared at the screen, observing the facts as they aligned. The puzzle pieces locked together without forcing a single edge. The late nights, the sudden distance, the way Olivia had seamlessly inserted herself into Cynthia's orbit while I was pushed out. They were not just sharing brunches. They were sharing my husband. I felt a cold, clinical clarity wash over me. My training kicked in. When you face a devastating diagnosis, panic is the enemy. You evaluate the scope of the damage and you prepare for the next phase. I closed the iPad, turned off the kitchen lights, and went to sleep. Liam returned home the following morning just after sunrise. He smelled of stale coffee and guilt. I was already dressed for work, standing by the espresso machine. I handed him a fresh cup. He took it, avoiding my gaze, launching into a rehearsed story about the investor dinner running late and crashing on a colleague's couch. I let him finish. I watched his eyes dart around the room, noting his elevated heart rate and the slight tremor in his hand. "You left your iPad on the island," I said. My voice was level. The rideshare receipt from Denver to the Boulder Hotel came through at 9. Olivia posted a photo from the restaurant at 8. Liam froze. He did not deny it. He did not mount a defense. The hollow facade of the confident tech entrepreneur collapsed in an instant. He set the coffee mug down so hard the liquid spilled over the rim, and he buried his face in his hands. He wept. He blamed the pressure of his mother's expectations. He blamed the grueling cycle of our fertility treatments. He blamed the heavy silence in our house. He was a man who had never faced a single consequence in his 30 years of life, and in the face of accountability, he folded. I stood there watching him cry, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness. He was waiting for me to scream, to throw plates, to give him a punishment he could apologize for. I gave him nothing but my absence. I took my purse and walked out the door. The true architect of the fallout, however, was not Liam. It was his mother. By the time I returned home from the clinic that evening, Cynthia had already seized control of the narrative. Liam had run to her estate the moment I left, seeking absolution. Cynthia did not reprimand her son for destroying his marriage. She saw an opportunity to finalize the upgrade she had been engineering for months. Olivia was the perfect candidate. She was the daughter of a prominent real estate developer possessing the right pedigree, the right zip code, and a desperate willingness to comply with Cynthia's rules. Olivia would provide the Kensington family with the biological heir required to unlock the next tier of Williams Trust Fund, securing their status in Colorado high society. I was merely collateral damage. Cynthia went to work immediately. She utilized her country club luncheons and charity board meetings to spread a very specific story. She told her wealthy peers that Liam was heartbroken, but the marriage had crumbled under the tragic reality of my biology. She whispered that I was barren and that the inability to conceive had made me unstable, bitter, and impossible to live with. She painted her son as a tragic hero who had tried everything to save his fragile wife before finally seeking solace in the arms of a lifelong friend. The social exile was swift. Invitations stopped arriving. Mutual friends suddenly became too busy to return my calls. Cynthia wanted to starve me out. She anticipated a messy, drawn-out divorce. She expected me to hire a vicious lawyer, demand alimony, and fight for a slice of the Kensington wealth. She wanted that fight. A legal battle would validate her narrative, proving to Denver society that I was nothing more than a working-class gold digger who had finally shown her true colors. I denied her that satisfaction. I chose the path of strategic silence. When Liam's high-priced attorneys presented the divorce settlement, it was loaded with aggressive clauses designed to protect his assets and minimize my payout. They sat across from me in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Denver, waiting for my counteroffer. Liam looked at the floor. Cynthia sat in the corner chair, her posture rigid, a smug smile playing on her lips. She was ready for war. I picked up the pen. I did not ask for the house in Aspen. I did not ask for spousal support. I requested only the funds I had personally contributed to our joint savings account and the retention of my own retirement fund. I signed the paperwork, cleanly pushed the folder across the mahogany table, and stood up. Cynthia's smile faltered. The easy surrender unnerved her. It broke the script she had written for me. "You are just giving up?" Cynthia asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Just like that?" I looked down at her. "I do not fight for things that hold no value to me, Cynthia." I left them sitting in the conference room. I drove back to the house we had shared to pack the last of my belongings. The moving boxes were already stacked in the hallway. I walked through the quiet rooms, stripping the space of my presence. I packed my clothes, my medical textbooks, and the small framed photograph of my mother. My final stop was the home office. Liam had already cleared out his desk, leaving behind empty drawers and a layer of dust. I bypassed the desk and went straight to the locked filing cabinet in the closet. I entered the combination, sliding the heavy metal drawer open. Tucked in the very back, hidden behind old tax returns and insurance policies, was a plain manila folder. I pulled it out and ran my fingers over the smooth paper. It did not contain bank statements or property deeds. It contained Liam's private medical records. Specifically, it held the results of a comprehensive genetic microarray I had run for him 8 months prior during the peak of our fertility struggles. Cynthia had built her entire narrative on the lie that my body was the broken link in the Kensington chain. She had paraded Olivia through Denver society, boasting about the inevitable biological heir that would soon arrive to secure their legacy. She had orchestrated my social ruin based on a biological assumption. I slipped the manila folder into my leather tote bag and zipped it shut. I walked out the front door, leaving my house keys on the kitchen counter, stepping into the crisp Colorado air. I did not feel defeated. I felt the steady, calm rhythm of a scientist who has just collected the final piece of data. Cynthia Kensington believed she had won the war, but she had no idea that I was carrying the weapon that would reduce her empire to ashes. The manila folder sitting in my leather tote bag felt heavier than it looked. It contained a single medical report printed on standard clinic letterhead, but the information typed across those pages held the power to dismantle the Kensington legacy brick by brick. To understand the gravity of that document, you have to understand the science of human reproduction, and more importantly, the arrogance of men who refuse to believe their own biology can fail them. 8 months before Liam packed his bags, the tension in our house had reached an unbearable pitch. The empty pregnancy tests were piling up. Cynthia was amplifying her whispers about my inferior working-class lineage. Liam, feeling the pressure from his mother to produce an heir, finally agreed to get himself tested. However, he refused to visit a traditional fertility specialist. He was terrified someone from his country club circle might see him in the waiting room. The Kensington ego could not tolerate the optics of potential inadequacy, so he asked me to handle it quietly. He provided a sample, and I processed it through the specialized diagnostic laboratory I used for my consulting practice. I requested a comprehensive genetic microarray, the most rigorous chromosomal analysis available. I remember the Tuesday afternoon the encrypted results populated on my clinic monitor. I sat in my office, a cup of lukewarm coffee resting on my desk, and read the sequence data. I did not need a second opinion to interpret the findings. The diagnosis was stark and undeniable. Liam possessed a specific genetic anomaly known as Y chromosome microdeletion. In clinical terms, a microscopic segment of the Y chromosome containing the instructions for sperm production was missing from his genetic code. This was not a condition that could be treated with holistic diets, expensive vitamins, or organic cleanses. It was not a temporary reduction in motility. It was a structural absence. The medical term is non-obstructive azoospermia. Liam produced 0 sperm. He was, by every metric of modern science, entirely sterile. Staring at that screen, I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel a sense of triumph. I felt a profound, crushing sorrow for my husband. I knew how desperately he wanted to fulfill the expectations placed upon him by his father and the trust fund parameters. I understood that this diagnosis would shatter his fragile sense of identity. My professional training dictated that such life-altering news must be delivered with immense care, ideally alongside a reproductive endocrinologist and a psychological counselor. I printed the report, placed it in a manila folder, and locked it in the filing cabinet in our home office. I decided to wait a few days to orchestrate a supportive environment. I planned to contact a trusted urologist, schedule a private consultation, and hold Liam's hand while the doctor explained our options. I wanted to protect him from the shame his mother would inevitably inflict upon him. I was ready to absorb the sorrow together, to redefine what our family might look like through adoption or donor avenues. But empathy requires a willing partner, and Liam was already spending his evenings in a boutique hotel with Olivia. Before I could arrange the gentle intervention, the digital trail of his infidelity materialized on his tablet. The deception was profound, but the aftermath engineered by Cynthia was unforgivable. As I packed my belongings and finalized the divorce settlement, I watched Cynthia orchestrate a public execution of my character. She stood at charity galas and country club luncheons, sipping imported champagne, confidently telling Denver high society that my body was flawed. She blamed my mother's long working hours and my modest upbringing for my inability to conceive. She elevated Olivia as the superior genetic specimen, the purebred replacement who would effortlessly provide the Kensington bloodline with its rightful heir. I listened to these cruel narratives filter back to me through mutual acquaintances. Every time I heard Cynthia's venomous words, I thought about the manila folder locked in the cabinet. I could have released the medical report during the divorce proceedings. I could have submitted it into the public record to clear my name, proving to the entire state of Colorado that the golden boy of the Kensington Empire was shooting blanks. It would have humiliated them all. Instead, I chose to keep the secret holstered. When someone is determined to destroy you using a false narrative, the most devastating countermeasure is to let them build their entire future on that same lie. Cynthia and Liam were celebrating a biological impossibility. They were arranging their lives, their finances, and their social standing around the anticipation of an heir that Liam could never physically create. If I exposed the truth, then they would have scrambled to manage the damage. They would have controlled the fallout. I realized that if I stepped away and allowed their arrogance to flourish unchecked, they would eventually engineer their own destruction. Let us delve deeper into the clinical reality of the situation. When a Y chromosome microdeletion is present specifically in the AZF regions, the instructions for spermatogenesis simply do not exist. It is akin to attempting to build a house without a blueprint. The materials might be present, but the assembly is biologically impossible. There are no surgeries to correct this missing code. There are no specialized procedures that can extract what the body cannot manufacture. The finality of the diagnosis is absolute. Sitting in my quiet apartment after the divorce, I frequently reflected on the sheer magnitude of their delusion. Liam was moving through the world accepting congratulations from his peers, buying miniature golf clubs and designer baby clothes. He was projecting the image of a proud, expectant father. I often wondered if he truly believed he had beaten the odds, or if he possessed a lingering doubt he was too cowardly to confront. Given his history of avoiding difficult truths, I suspected he simply accepted Olivia's pregnancy as a convenient miracle. He never questioned the mechanics because questioning it would require facing the potential of his own inadequacy. Cynthia, meanwhile, was constructing a fortress of hubris. She used the impending birth as a social weapon, wielding it to assert her dominance over anyone who dared question the Kensington superiority. She was not merely expecting a grandchild. She was expecting vindication. Every smug smile, every pointed comment about robust fertility was a brick in a wall she was building around herself. I allowed them to build that wall as high as they wanted. My strategic silence was not born of malice. It was born of a clinical understanding of cause and effect. I knew that the Kensington Family Trust required a verified, legally documented DNA test to release the generational wealth. William's father had implemented the biological clause decades ago to prevent external parties from claiming the fortune. The trust attorneys would demand a standard buccal swab to confirm paternity before a single dollar transferred into Liam's accounts. They were marching toward an unavoidable genetic checkpoint. I did not need to scream cry or launch a defamation lawsuit. I just needed to wait for the biological reality to intersect with their financial greed. The beauty of genetics is its utter indifference to human ego. A nucleotide sequence does not care how much money you have in the bank. It does not care about your zip code, your designer clothing, or the private jets you charter. It is an unbribable witness. As I sat in the hospital corridor that Tuesday morning, watching Cynthia gloat about the arrival of her precious grandson, the dramatic irony reached its peak. She was looking at me with pure contempt, thinking she had defeated the sterile working-class nuisance who had briefly stained her family history. She was bragging about an infant boy, a biological heir she believed would cement her power. She had no concept of the storm gathering directly over her head. She did not realize that the baby boy resting in the neonatal wing was a walking, breathing testament to a deception so profound it would tear her marriage apart. I looked at Cynthia's self-satisfied grin and felt a profound sense of calm. The trap was set, the evidence was indisputable, and the moment of revelation was rapidly approaching. All I had to do was let the science speak. Olivia inherited my life, but she also inherited the expectations that came with it. She moved her designer luggage into the primary suite of the home I had decorated, wearing the victory of her new engagement ring like a crown. She had secured Liam, elevating her status within the Denver social hierarchy to the highest possible tier. However, the Kensington wealth was not a gift. It was a conditional transaction. To unlock the family trust and secure her permanent position, Olivia had to provide a biological heir. She approached the task with the same ruthless efficiency she used to plan charity galas. The initial months served as a honeymoon phase. Cynthia hosted lavish engagement parties, parading Olivia around the country club as the perfect future mother of the Kensington legacy. But as the seasons changed, the nursery remained empty. The calendar became an undeniable adversary. Olivia was tracking her cycles, purchasing expensive ovulation monitors, and following the exact same regimens I had endured. The results were identical. Every month ended with a single line on a plastic stick. Olivia was not accustomed to failure. She was the daughter of a prominent real estate developer raised in an environment where money solved every inconvenience. When her body did not produce, a pregnancy panic began to take root. Cynthia, who possessed the patience of a ticking metronome, started dropping pointed remarks over Sunday brunch. The warmth Cynthia had shown Olivia began to cool, replaced by the familiar calculating stare I knew so well. Olivia realized very quickly that her favored status was temporary. If she could not deliver a child, she would suffer the exact same social execution I had endured. Desperation breeds reckless behavior. Olivia bypassed Liam's denial and scheduled an appointment at the Apex Fertility Institute, an exclusive clinic in downtown Denver. She insisted Liam undergo a comprehensive evaluation, likely using the threat of public embarrassment to force his compliance. She needed to know why her perfect plan was stalling. I know this because my consulting practice frequently partners with the Apex Institute to analyze complex karyotypes. The medical community in Colorado is a tightly woven network, and high-profile patients generate a specific kind of quiet logistical maneuvering. While patient confidentiality is strictly maintained, the movement of data leaves footprints. I did not need to access their files to understand the sequence of events. The timeline spoke for itself. Olivia took Liam to the clinic, and the clinic delivered the inevitable diagnosis. Liam produced 0 sperm. The golden child was sterile. Faced with the undeniable medical reality, Olivia found herself cornered. She could not divorce Liam without facing a humiliating public scandal, admitting she had stolen a husband who was biologically useless to her ambitions. She could not adopt because the Kensington trust attorneys enforced a strict biological clause implemented by William's father decades ago. The generational wealth would only transfer upon the verified birth of a direct blood descendant. An anonymous sperm donor from a clinical bank would result in a baby, but it would fail the mandatory legal DNA screening. The trust would remain locked, and Cynthia would eventually cast Olivia out. Olivia needed a specific sequence of nucleotides. She needed Kensington DNA. This is where the narrative shifts from simple infidelity into profound moral decay. Liam was an only child. He had no brothers to provide a genetic match. The only other living source of the required biological material was William Kensington himself. William was a man defined by his ego. He spent his life acquiring companies' properties and influence. He viewed his bloodline as his ultimate asset, a testament to his own enduring greatness. Approaching age 60, he was facing the twilight of his relevance. The knowledge that his only son could not carry the family name forward must have felt like a terminal defeat. I do not know the exact words Olivia used to propose the arrangement. I do not know if it happened after a tense family dinner or during a quiet afternoon at the Aspen estate. The logistical details of their betrayal are irrelevant. The biological mechanics are the only facts that matter. Olivia realized that a clinical donation procedure involving a father-in-law would require extensive psychological evaluations, ethics committee approvals, and a paper trail that could be easily exposed. That route was too dangerous. It left too many witnesses. They bypassed the medical establishment entirely. Olivia chose the traditional physical method to acquire the genetic material she needed. She slept with her father-in-law. William, driven by a twisted sense of dynastic survival and his own narcissistic vanity, agreed to betray his son and his wife. They committed a grotesque violation of every familial boundary, united by a shared desperate greed. When Olivia announced her pregnancy a few months later, the Denver social scene erupted in celebration. Cynthia hosted a lavish baby shower, oblivious to the reality that she was celebrating her husband's child. Liam played the role of the proud, expectant father, choosing to remain willfully blind to the timing and the biological impossibility of his own impending fatherhood. The deception was nearly flawless, but it possessed one fatal flaw. It relied on my silence, and it required a final legally mandated DNA screening to satisfy the trust attorneys. As part of my role at Denver Memorial Hospital, I oversee the processing of specialized genetic testing for high-net-worth families navigating complex trust disbursements. The attorneys require neutral third-party verification to prevent fraud, mandating a certified chain of custody for the DNA. When the Kensington baby was born, a routine buccal swab was collected from the infant in the neonatal wing to establish a baseline genetic profile. That profile was then cross-referenced against the established Kensington familial markers on file. I was sitting in my office when the algorithm finished its comparative analysis. The software highlighted the genetic overlap, plotting the shared alleles on a digital graph. The infant possessed the required genetic link to the Kensington lineage, satisfying the basic requirements of the trust. However, the system also generated a specific relationship coefficient. The data did not indicate a standard paternal match with Liam. It indicated a first-degree genetic relationship with the patriarch's profile. The infant shared exactly 50% of its genetic material with William Kensington. The child was not William's grandson. The child was his son. I stared at the glowing monitor, feeling the familiar chill of clinical detachment. I traced the nucleotide sequences with my cursor, verifying the data points. There was no margin for error. The science laid bare the sickening reality of their actions. Olivia had secured her inheritance by engaging in an affair with her father-in-law, and William had secured his legacy by cuckolding his own sterile son. I printed the finalized laboratory report. The document contained the irrefutable proof of their depravity sealed beneath the official crest of the genetics department. It was a piece of paper that would not just stop the transfer of the trust funds, it would detonate the entire foundation of the Kensington family. The hospital protocol required the attending physician to deliver the physical results to the designated family representative before discharge. That representative was William. Which brings us back to the present moment, standing in the pristine corridor of the maternity ward. Cynthia was still smirking at me, draped in cashmere, bragging about her beautiful new grandson and her son's perfect life. She was demanding that William hurry up so they could present their prize to the world. She had no idea that the man standing next to her, clutching the sealed envelope with trembling hands, was not looking at his grandchild. He was looking at the undeniable consequence of his own arrogance. And as William Kensington locked eyes with me in that hallway, he realized that I was the one person in the hospital who could read the code that was about to destroy his life. The private recovery suite on the 4th floor of Denver Memorial Hospital smelled of expensive lilies and medical-grade antiseptic. Cynthia had insisted on guiding me into the room, eager to ensure I witnessed the culmination of her grand design. She wanted me to stand in the epicenter of her victory. I stepped over the threshold, my tablet tucked under my arm, projecting the calm demeanor of a professional on a routine consultation. Olivia rested against a mound of sterile pillows in the center of the room. She wore a silk nightgown that cost more than my monthly rent, her hair carefully styled for the inevitable social media photographs. She looked exhausted, but a profound, desperate relief radiated from her posture. She believed she had successfully navigated the most dangerous transaction of her life. She had delivered the biological key to the Kensington Empire. Cynthia hovered over the clear plastic bassinet situated near the window. She adjusted the edge of her cashmere wrap, a gesture of practiced elegance, and beckoned me forward. She wanted me to look at the child. She wanted me to feel the sting of replacement. I walked toward the bassinet. The newborn was swaddled in a pristine white blanket, sleeping soundly under the soft glow of the overhead lights. "He is perfect," Cynthia whispered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She reached down and smoothed a tiny wisp of dark hair on the infant's head. "The Kensington genes are so resilient. You can already see Liam in his profile, the strong jaw, the distinguished brow. It is remarkable how true bloodlines assert themselves." I stood next to her and looked down at the sleeping infant. I did not see the triumphant continuation of a dynasty. I saw a canvas of phenotypic expression, a living map of dominant and recessive alleles. My professional training requires me to notice the details that ordinary people overlook. I observe the pebbles before they form an avalanche. The infant turned his head slightly in his sleep, exposing the side of his face. I noted the structure of his ears. The lobes were attached, merging directly with the skin of his cheek. My mind immediately retrieved the data from the comprehensive microarray I had run on Liam 8 months prior. Alongside the devastating microdeletion that rendered him sterile, the panel had mapped his entire genetic profile. Liam was homozygous dominant for unattached earlobes. His genetic code contained no recessive instructions for that specific trait. Olivia also possessed prominent unattached earlobes. While 2 heterozygous parents can produce a child with a recessive trait, the math in this specific pairing was definitive. Liam lacked the required allele entirely. It was biologically impossible for him to father a child with attached earlobes. My gaze drifted to the top of the infant's forehead. A distinct, sharp widow's peak pointed downward toward the bridge of his nose. A widow's peak is a classic dominant genetic trait. Liam possessed a perfectly straight hairline. Olivia possessed a straight hairline. 2 individuals displaying a recessive trait cannot mathematically produce an offspring displaying the dominant version of that trait. The genetic instructions simply do not exist in their combined DNA. I looked away from the bassinet and pictured William Kensington. The patriarch of the family possessed distinct, firmly attached earlobes. He also carried a very sharp, prominent widow's peak that he brushed his silver hair back to display. The infant in the plastic cart was not a blend of Liam and Olivia. The child was a flawless, undeniable genetic mirror of his grandfather. He truly is a marvel, I said, keeping my voice level. Genetics rarely lie. Cynthia preened, interpreting my statement as a painful concession of defeat. They never lie, Evelyn. That is why William insisted on the standard trust verification today. We are just waiting on the final paperwork from the laboratory to authorize the transfer. Liam is downstairs speaking with the attorneys now. Once the signature is on the dotted line, Olivia and the baby will be fully integrated into the estate. She was boasting about a legal process she did not understand, relying on a system designed to detect the exact fraud her daughter-in-law had committed. The trust attorneys required a certified buccal swab to prevent external claims on the fortune. They utilized the same genetic screening department where I reviewed high-level cases every single week. The heavy wooden door of the recovery suite clicked open. William Kensington stepped into the room. He was a man who had built his fortune by intimidating local politicians and crushing rival developers. He typically commanded any space he entered, radiating a cold, calculating authority. But the man standing in the doorway looked as though he had just survived a catastrophic impact. His trademark tailored suit looked rumpled. His skin held a gray, bloodless pallor, and a sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead. His breathing was shallow and erratic. In his right hand, he clutched a sealed manila envelope bearing the official bright red insignia of the Denver Memorial Genetics Department. William closed the door behind him and lifted his head. His gaze swept past his wife and bypassed the woman resting in the hospital bed. His eyes locked directly onto mine. The silence in the room became suffocating. The rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor in the hallway seemed to magnify in the stillness. William stopped walking. The crisp hospital envelope trembled against his thigh, the paper rustling in his unsteady grip. He knew exactly what my job title was. He knew that I spent my days analyzing the precise familial algorithms contained within the pages he was holding. He realized that the woman standing next to his wife, the woman they had discarded and humiliated for a year, possessed the clinical expertise to read the radioactive secret typed across that laboratory report. Cynthia turned away from the bassinet, her cashmere wrap slipping off her shoulder. She frowned, clearly irritated by her husband's sudden and inexplicable paralysis. "William, what is the matter with you?" she demanded, her voice sharp with impatience. "You look dreadful. Did the attorneys try to delay the disbursement again? Hand me the paperwork so we can finalize this and get our grandson out of this dismal place." William did not move. He did not hand her the envelope. He remained frozen at the threshold, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the physical proof of his moral decay. The fear radiating from his posture was a tangible force sucking the oxygen out of the suite. He was staring at me with the wide, desperate eyes of a cornered animal realizing the trap had already snapped shut. Olivia pushed herself up against her pillows, her exhausted face shifting into a mask of sudden creeping dread. She saw the terror in William's eyes and followed his gaze across the room. When she saw me standing there maintaining my quiet professional posture, the relief she had been projecting evaporated. Her breath caught in her throat. Cynthia finally noticed the direction of her husband's terrified stare. She looked at William, noting the visible tremor in his hands, and then she turned her head to look at me. The smug superiority vanished from Cynthia's face. The porcelain mask of Boulder High society cracked and shattered under the weight of an unexplainable fear. She did not know the specifics of the betrayal yet. She did not know that her husband had fathered the child sleeping in the bassinet beside her. But she possessed the primal instinct of a predator sensing a larger unseen threat in the tall grass. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking hollow and old. She watched her untouchable husband shake under my silent gaze, and she realized the power dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. I did not break eye contact with William. I did not offer a word of comfort or a gesture of aggression. I simply stood my ground, clutching my digital tablet, and allowed a calm, knowing smile to touch the corners of my mouth. The performance was over. The science had arrived, and the truth was demanding to be read. The sterile scent of the hospital corridor offered a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside the recovery suite. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, unforgiving glow on the polished linoleum floor. It was an environment built for clinical truths, a place where bodies were examined, measured, and diagnosed without sentimentality. William cleared his throat, the sound rough and unnatural in the quiet hallway. He shoved the sealed envelope into the interior pocket of his tailored suit jacket, desperate to hide the red laboratory crest from his wife's view. His eyes remained fixed on me, pleading for a temporary reprieve from the inevitable. "Evelyn," he managed to say. His voice strained and lacking its usual baritone authority. "Could I speak with you in the corridor for a moment? I need a brief professional consultation regarding the formatting of these hospital documents." Cynthia rolled her eyes, adjusting her cashmere wrap with a sharp, impatient tug. "William, do not waste your time seeking advice from her. You have a team of highly paid lawyers on retainer for this exact purpose. Just hand me the clearance forms so we can leave." "It will only take 1 minute, Cynthia," he snapped. It was a rare fracture in his usually composed demeanor, and the sudden harshness of his tone caused Cynthia to blink in surprise. I offered a curt nod and turned toward the exit. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the warmth of the suite and plunging us into the cool glare of the hallway. The moment we were isolated from the audience inside the room, William's authoritative posture collapsed. The untouchable patriarch of the Kensington Empire looked like a terrified, cornered animal. He paced a few steps down the corridor, running a trembling hand through his silver hair, disrupting the sharp widow's peak that perfectly mirrored the infant sleeping in the next room. William had built his vast fortune over 4 decades by bulldozing local zoning laws, manipulating city politicians, and burying his corporate mistakes under mountains of cash. He approached every crisis in his life as a financial transaction. He fundamentally believed that any rule, whether it was a strict municipal code or a sacred moral boundary, could be bypassed if you possessed the correct routing number. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. The fluorescent lights overhead highlighted the deep lines of panic etched around his mouth. "You know," he stated. It was not a question. It was a concession. "I know that your son has a Y chromosome microdeletion," I replied. I kept my tone clinical, detached, and precise. "I know he is biologically incapable of producing a child. I also know how familial matching algorithms process shared genetic markers during a standard screening." William swallowed hard. His skin retained that sickly, chalky hue. "Liam does not know. Cynthia does not know. Olivia and I went to great lengths to ensure the lineage remained intact." He trailed off, unable to voice the grotesque reality of his own depravity out loud. I did not offer him a lifeline. I let the silence hang in the corridor, forcing him to sit with the crushing weight of his actions. I observed his rapid breathing and the sweat gathering at his temples. He was exhibiting a textbook physiological stress response, his autonomic nervous system flooding his body with adrenaline as his carefully constructed world began to disintegrate. "We can handle this discreetly, Evelyn," he said. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, scanning the empty hallway for passing nurses. "You are a highly intelligent woman. You understand how much money is at stake here. The family trust is structured with very specific archaic biological clauses established by my father. He was a paranoid man who wanted to ensure no outside party could ever access the primary capital. If this laboratory report goes to the estate attorneys, the financial disbursement is frozen permanently. The ensuing scandal will ruin my son. It will destroy my wife. He was appealing to my empathy, attempting to cast himself as a noble protector of his family rather than the architect of their destruction. When that emotional tactic failed to produce a sympathetic reaction from me, he pivoted seamlessly to the only language he truly understood. "I am prepared to offer you a highly lucrative position," William continued, the desperation bleeding into his pitch. "A permanent consulting contract with Kensington Enterprises. We need a dedicated health and wellness director to oversee our new commercial developments in Boulder. I am offering a 7-figure annual retainer paid directly to your private accounts starting today. All you have to do is sign a standard non-disclosure agreement regarding Liam's medical history and the specific origins of my grandson." He called the child his grandson. Even now, standing in the wreckage of his own making, he was trying to preserve the illusion, twisting the vocabulary to shield his ego. I looked at the man who had happily funded my social exile. This was the pinnacle of Colorado elite hypocrisy. The Kensingtons curated public personas centered on organic purity, ethical investing, and genetic superiority, while privately engaging in profound moral decay. They believed their vast wealth insulated them from the fundamental laws of nature. I thought about my mother, a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for me without a single advantage. I thought about the families I counseled every week, people who faced devastating medical realities with courage and grace. And then I looked at William Kensington, a man willing to purchase a fabricated reality to protect his fragile pride. "You are offering me a bribe to commit fraud," I said. My voice remained flat, devoid of anger, judgment, or temptation. "You want me to accept hush money to conceal the fact that you fathered a child with your daughter-in-law to bypass a legal trust stipulation." William flinched at the blunt clinical accuracy of my words. "It is a consulting fee, Evelyn. It is a mutually beneficial arrangement to preserve the peace and protect an innocent child. A checkbook cannot rewrite a nucleotide sequence, William," I said. "The trust attorneys require an independent, verified chain of custody for the DNA screening. I cannot alter the results of the hospital laboratory. The data belongs to the official patient record. Your money is entirely useless here." The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. For the first time in his privileged life, William Kensington had encountered a problem he could not buy his way out of. The biological reality of his actions was already locked into a secure digital hospital database, ready to be transmitted to the legal teams governing his fortune. Before William could formulate another desperate offer, the heavy door to the recovery suite swung open. Cynthia stepped into the hallway. The sudden movement startled William, forcing him to take a hasty step back and put physical distance between us. Cynthia did not notice her husband's panic. Her attention was focused squarely on me. She wore an expression of supreme confidence, bolstered by the belief that she had just secured her family's untouchable status in Denver society. "Are you finished asking for free advice, William?" she asked, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from her pristine athletic wear. "Olivia needs her rest, and I want to finalize the discharge paperwork so we can take our heir home." She turned her gaze to me, her eyes narrowing with calculated malice. The presence of the new baby had emboldened her. She believed she held all the leverage, and she wanted to use this specific moment of triumph to tie up a lingering loose end from my divorce. "While you are still standing here, Evelyn, we need to discuss the property in Breckenridge," Cynthia said. During the final divorce settlement, I had forfeited my claim to the primary residence in Boulder, but my name remained on the deed to a small, undeveloped parcel of land near a popular ski resort. It was a minor administrative oversight by Liam's legal team, a small asset that had slipped through the cracks of the rushed negotiations. "The Breckenridge property," I repeated, watching her set her own trap. "Yes," Cynthia said. She stepped closer, attempting to tower over me with her designer heels. "Liam and Olivia will be restructuring their asset portfolio this month to accommodate the new baby. They need that specific parcel of land to begin construction on a private family retreat. It is prime real estate, and it belongs with the Kensington bloodline. I expect you to sign a quitclaim deed relinquishing your remaining interest in the property by the end of the week." I listened to her issue her demands, marveling at the sheer scope of her hubris. Cynthia operated under the assumption that she could bend reality to her will through sheer force of personality. She treated the legal system the same way she treated service workers, expecting immediate compliance without question. But family law, much like genetic science, operates on a foundation of strict, unyielding rules. I looked from Cynthia to William. William was staring at his wife in muted horror. He knew that initiating a property dispute right now was the equivalent of striking a match in a room filled with gasoline. "Cynthia, leave it alone," William croaked, his voice cracking under the strain. "The land does not matter right now. Let it go." "Of course it matters," Cynthia snapped, refusing to yield an inch of her perceived power. "We are establishing a permanent legacy for my grandson. I will not have her name attached to a single Kensington asset moving forward. I want her attorneys to draft the waiver today. We will push the transfer through the family courts immediately to ensure a clean break." Her towering arrogance was blinding her to the legal mechanics of her own demand. By forcing a formal restructuring of real estate assets specifically designated for the new infant Cynthia, was actively demanding a legal process that would require sworn affidavits. The transfer of trust-affiliated property to a minor heir mandated a full disclosure of the child's legal and biological status to the presiding judge to prevent future inheritance disputes. She was demanding an expedited court procedure that would drag the hospital laboratory report out of the confidential trust files and directly into the public record. I felt a cold, quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. I did not need to expose them. They were going to expose themselves. Cynthia's relentless need to diminish me was driving her straight into the center of the blast radius. I held her furious, condescending stare. I did not raise my voice. I did not show her a single trace of intimidation. "I understand your urgency, Cynthia," I said. "I will have my attorney review the biological stipulations." 3 days passed since the confrontation in the hospital corridor. I returned to the predictable rhythm of my consulting practice in Boulder. My clinic is a sanctuary of empirical truth. The walls are painted a soothing sage green, and the air is filtered and quiet. People come to my office seeking answers written in their DNA, and I provide those answers without judgment. It is an environment built on clarity, which made Olivia's sudden appearance there feel like a profound violation of the natural order. It was a Friday afternoon. My receptionist paged my office, her voice laced with uncertainty, announcing that a woman was demanding to see me without an appointment. I did not need to ask for a name. I instructed my receptionist to send her back. The door opened and Olivia stepped into the clinical space. The facade of the untouchable Denver socialite had fractured. Her usually flawless blonde hair was pulled into a haphazard knot, and her designer trench coat looked as though she had slept in it. She clutched a leather handbag against her chest like a protective shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed, the edges of her expensive mascara smudged into dark shadows. She looked like a woman who had spent the last 72 hours watching the walls of her life close in. For a brief moment, looking at her standing there, I saw the girl I had shared a dorm room with a decade ago. We used to study for exams together, fueled by cheap coffee and mutual ambition. But that girl was gone. She had been replaced by a woman who chose status over loyalty, a woman who decided my husband and my life were assets she could simply acquire. Now those acquired assets were transforming into a crushing liability. Olivia did not wait for an invitation to sit down. She collapsed into the chair opposite my desk and immediately began to weep. It was a practiced, performative sorrow. I had seen patients cry in this office upon receiving devastating medical news, and their grief was a quiet, suffocating weight. Olivia's tears were noisy and theatrical. She was deploying the only weapon she had left. She was trying to manipulate my empathy, hoping to find a remnant of the friendship she had discarded. "Evelyn," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "You have to listen to me. It is not what it looks like. You do not understand what I have been through." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. I did not offer her a tissue from the box on my desk. I did not reach across the polished wood to comfort her. I maintained my professional posture, observing her breakdown with the same detachment I used to analyze a complex chromosomal chart. "I understand biology, Olivia," I said. My voice was steady and quiet. "The genetic markers are not ambiguous." She dropped her hands, her breath hitching. The realization that her tears were failing to soften my demeanor caused a flicker of genuine panic in her eyes. She shifted her strategy, leaning forward and lowering her voice into a desperate, hurried whisper. "William forced me into it," she pleaded, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of my desk. "He cornered me in the study after a dinner party. He told me that if I did not provide a biological heir, he would cut Liam out of the primary trust entirely. He said Cynthia would find a way to annul the marriage and ruin my family's reputation in the real estate sector. I was terrified. I felt trapped in their house. He manipulated me, Evelyn. He took advantage of a vulnerable situation to secure his own legacy." She was attempting to cast herself as a victim, painting William as a predatory mastermind. While William was undeniably a narcissist obsessed with his bloodline, I knew Olivia was not a helpless pawn. She was a willing participant who recognized a transaction and agreed to the terms. She traded her bodily autonomy for a permanent share of the Kensington fortune, and now she wanted me to absolve her of the moral bankruptcy that transaction required. "And Liam?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on hers. "Did William force you to lie to the man you claim to love?" Olivia flinched as if struck. Liam was devastated by his diagnosis. When the clinic confirmed he was sterile, he shattered. He refused to look at the paperwork. He pretended it was not happening, drinking himself to sleep every night. I just wanted to give him the family he always dreamed of. I wanted to fix it for him so he would not feel like a failure. I did this to protect Liam. The audacity of her rationalization was breathtaking. She was attempting to reframe an act of profound betrayal as an act of selfless devotion. She wanted me to validate her choices, to tell her she was a good wife forced into an impossible corner. My professional training requires me to practice clinical empathy. This means I can recognize and validate a person's emotional state without validating the distorted narrative they use to justify it. "I understand that you were afraid of losing your social standing," I said, keeping my tone strictly objective. "I understand that the pressure from the Kensington family is an immense burden, but I will not absorb your guilt, Olivia. You made a calculated decision to bypass a medical reality through a deceptive act. You own the consequences of that choice." Her chest heaved, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her cheeks and dripping onto the lapel of her coat. "Please, Evelyn, I am begging you. If this gets out, my life is over. Liam will leave me. My parents will disown me. The scandal will destroy everything I have built. You are the only one who knows the truth outside of William and me. You have to keep this a secret. You owe me that much for the years we were friends." She had invoked our past friendship, the very bond she had discarded the moment it became inconvenient for her upward mobility. The irony hung heavy in the sterile air of my consulting room. I folded my hands on the pristine surface of my desk. I looked directly into her terrified eyes. I wanted her to hear every single syllable with crystal clarity. "I don't deal in gossip, Olivia," I stated. "I deal in nucleotides, and nucleotides don't lie. I am a medical professional. I have no interest in calling the Denver social columns to expose your infidelity. I am not going to hunt you down or orchestrate a public smear campaign to exact revenge. Your secrets are your own burden to carry." A fleeting expression of relief washed over her face. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. She mistakenly believed she had secured my silence, assuming my refusal to seek vengeance equated to a promise of complicity. She reached for her leather handbag, preparing to compose herself and retreat back to her fabricated life. But I was not finished. "However," I continued, causing her to freeze in her chair, "you need to understand the legal reality of the situation you have created. Cynthia cornered me in the hospital corridor while you were resting. She demanded I sign a quitclaim deed for the Breckenridge property. She wants to expedite a legal transfer of that asset specifically for your new baby." Olivia stared at me, her mouth parting in silent confusion. She did not grasp the legal implications of her mother-in-law's arrogance. She did not understand how real estate law intersected with trust disbursements. If Cynthia initiates a formal restructuring of trust assets for a minor heir in the state of Colorado, the family courts mandate a disclosure of biological parentage to prevent fraudulent inheritance claims. I explained, outlining the mechanics of the law with cold precision. If she files those motions, I will be subpoenaed as a party of interest to the property. My legal counsel will be forced to respond to the asset division, and if I am placed under oath and asked to verify the biological standing of the child set to inherit that land, I will answer truthfully. Olivia stopped breathing. The color vanished from her face, leaving her skin a pale, sickly gray. The realization crashed into her with brutal force. She was not safe. The threat was not coming from my desire for revenge. The threat was coming from inside her own house. "I will not perjure myself to protect your lie," I told her, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "I will not risk my medical license or commit a felony because you and William decided to play God with a trust fund. If Cynthia forces a legal battle over that land, the hospital laboratory reports will be subpoenaed into the public record. The truth will be entered into evidence, and there is nothing William's money can do to seal those files." Olivia began to tremble. Her hands shook so badly she dropped her handbag onto the floor. The contents, a gold compact, a set of car keys, and a tube of expensive lipstick spilled across the carpet, but she did not move to retrieve them. She was entirely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her predicament. She had spent a year manipulating the system, stepping over me to secure her prize, only to realize that her mother-in-law's insatiable greed was about to pull the trigger on the trap I had simply left sitting in the open. "You have to stop her," Olivia whispered, her voice a fragile, broken thread. "You have to call Cynthia. Tell her you will give her the land. Tell her you will sign whatever she wants. You have to make her drop the property transfer." "I do not control Cynthia," I replied, standing up to signal the end of the consultation. "And neither do you. You are entirely at the mercy of her arrogance now. If she decides her ego requires that piece of land, she will drag your secret into the light all by herself. You built this cage, Olivia. Now you get to see how strong the bars are." I walked around my desk and opened the heavy wooden door to my office. I stood aside, waiting for her to leave. Olivia scrambled out of the chair, gathering her spilled belongings with frantic, uncoordinated movements. She looked at me one last time before stepping into the hallway. The facade of the perfect, wealthy socialite was gone. She was just a terrified woman holding a stolen life, waiting for the floor to drop out from beneath her. The digital chime of my smartphone cut through the quiet hum of my Friday evening. I picked up the device from the kitchen counter. The screen displayed a text message from Liam. It was the first direct communication I had received from him in 12 months. He requested a meeting. He stated that the atmosphere in his household had grown inexplicably tense, citing his father's sudden erratic behavior and Olivia's relentless crying spells. He wanted to understand why my name kept surfacing in their hushed arguments. I typed a brief response agreeing to meet him the following morning at an independent coffee shop located in the Lodo district of Denver. I chose a public neutral territory to ensure he could not control the environment. The morning sun cast long, sharp shadows across the brick pavement as I walked to the cafe. I chose a small table near the front window, placing my leather tote bag on the chair beside me. The air smelled of roasted beans and warm pastries. Liam arrived 10 minutes late. He wore a fitted cashmere sweater and a bespoke wool coat, broadcasting the curated image of a successful vanguard of the technology industry. He ordered an artisanal pour-over coffee, paying with a platinum card linked directly to the Kensington Family Trust. He sat across from me, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He looked exhausted, yet the signature arrogance his mother had cultivated in him remained fully intact. He did not begin with an apology. He did not inquire about my well-being. He bypassed common decency and went straight to the transactional nature of his visit. He explained that Cynthia was pushing hard for the Breckenridge property transfer, and the resulting friction was disrupting his peace. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of patronizing concern. He told me that he finally had the legacy he was always meant to build. He spoke about his new son, the heir to the estate, and how Olivia was struggling with postpartum anxiety. He requested that I simply sign the quitclaim deed to appease his mother and allow his new family to move forward without my shadow lingering over their assets. He spoke as if I were a minor clerical error he needed to resolve before lunch. I listened to his rehearsed speech, observing the man I had once promised to build a life with. He was a hollow vessel filled entirely with the expectations of his parents and the unearned wealth of his ancestors. He lacked the capacity for introspection. He believed his own fabricated narrative because examining the truth required a spine he did not possess. I reached into my leather tote bag. I bypassed my wallet and my keys, closing my fingers around the smooth edge of the manila folder. I pulled it out and placed it flat on the wooden table between us. I slid the document across the surface until it rested inches from his expensive coffee cup. "I am not going to sign the property waiver, Liam," I said. My voice carried the calm, steady cadence of a clinician delivering test results. I suggest you open that folder before you continue lecturing me about your biological legacy. Liam frowned, offended by my refusal to comply with his demands. He picked up the folder, breaking the seal, and extracted the single sheet of paper inside. It was the official report from the diagnostic laboratory I had consulted during our marriage. The clinic letterhead sat bold and dark at the top of the page. I watched his eyes scan the introductory paragraphs. He possessed a superficial understanding of scientific terminology, a byproduct of attending expensive preparatory schools, but he lacked the depth to grasp the immediate implications. He looked up at me, confusion knotting his brow. "This is a microarray panel from 3 years ago," he stated, his voice laced with irritation. "Why are you showing me old medical records? Look at the chromosomal mapping in the third paragraph." I instructed, pointing to the specific section of the text. "You requested a comprehensive evaluation during our fertility treatments. You wanted to know why we were failing to conceive. You refused to see a public specialist, so I processed the sample through my private diagnostic network. Those are your results, Liam." He dropped his gaze back to the paper. The irritation in his posture began to crack, replaced by a slow, creeping uncertainty. I did not give him time to construct a defense. I delivered the clinical reality with surgical precision. "The analysis confirmed a Y chromosome microdeletion," I explained, maintaining strict eye contact. "It is a structural anomaly within your genetic code. The specific region responsible for spermatogenesis is absent. You suffer from non-obstructive azoospermia. You produce 0 sperm. You are entirely sterile. You always have been." The words struck him with physical force. His breath hitched a sharp intake of air that rattled in his chest. He read the paragraph again, his pupils dilating as the medical jargon translated into a devastating personal reality. The golden child of the Kensington Empire, the man tasked with carrying a legendary bloodline into the next generation, was a biological dead end. He dropped the paper onto the table. His hands began to shake, mirroring the exact tremor I had observed in his father outside the hospital recovery suite. He stared at me, his face pale and slack. "This is a fabrication," he whispered, a feeble attempt to reject the data. "You forged this to punish me for leaving you." "I do not forge medical documents," I replied. "You can take that report to any urologist in the state of Colorado. They will run a fresh sample and provide you with the exact same diagnosis. The science is definitive, Liam. You cannot father a child." I watched the cognitive gears turn behind his terrified eyes. The initial shock of his own inadequacy began to merge with the immediate glaring contradiction of his current life. He had a newborn son resting in a nursery across town. He had a wife who claimed that child belonged to him. The realization dawned on him, slowly spreading like a dark stain across his consciousness. If he was sterile, the infant could not be his. "But Olivia had the baby," he stammered, the logic breaking his mind in real time. "She passed the genetic screening for the trust. The attorneys verified the bloodline." I folded my hands on the table. I leaned forward, lowering my voice to ensure the neighboring patrons could not hear the autopsy of his marriage. "The trust requires a verified Kensington DNA match to release the capital," I said. "The infant passed the screening because the child does possess Kensington DNA, but the child did not get that DNA from you." Liam stopped breathing. His jaw tightened as his mind raced through the only possible alternatives. He had no brothers. He had no male cousins. There was only one other source of the required genetic material. I saw the exact second the grotesque truth materialized in his head. The color drained from his lips. A look of pure, unadulterated revulsion twisted his features. He covered his mouth with his hand, stifling a sudden urge to vomit. He finally understood why his father was experiencing panic attacks. He finally understood why his new wife was weeping uncontrollably in their bedroom. His father and his wife had engineered a repulsive betrayal to bypass a legal technicality and secure a fortune. They had used him as a naive, sterile prop to legitimize their transaction. A man with a shred of integrity would have stood up, flipped the table, and marched back to his estate to demand a reckoning. A man with honor would have confronted the people who violated his trust so profoundly. But Liam Kensington was not a man of honor. He was a creature of comfort. He had spent his entire life shielded by his family wealth, protected from the harsh elements of reality. I observed his posture shift. The righteous fury I expected to see never arrived. Instead, a pathetic, suffocating paralysis took hold of him. He looked down at his expensive, bespoke coat. He looked at his platinum credit card resting near his coffee cup. He realized that exposing the truth would not just destroy his father and his wife. It would trigger a catastrophic scandal that would freeze the family trust, humiliate him in front of Denver high society, and sever his access to the bottomless bank accounts he relied upon to fund his hollow existence. If he demanded justice, he would lose his luxury. "What do I do?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a pathetic, childlike desperation. He looked at me, begging for guidance, reverting to his ingrained habit of letting a woman solve his problems. "I cannot tell you how to live your life, Liam," I said, retrieving my leather tote bag and standing up from the table. "You have to decide which is more important to you, the truth or the trust fund." I did not wait for his answer. I left the manila folder resting on the table, a paper tombstone for his ego. I walked out of the coffee shop and into the crisp morning air, leaving him trapped in a prison constructed entirely of his own cowardice. He now possessed the knowledge that could shatter his family, but he lacked the courage to strike the match. It did not matter. His mother was already preparing to light the fire for him. Cynthia was moving forward with her grand design. Unaware of the radioactive secret festering in her own home, she was busy orchestrating the most lavish social event of the season to formally introduce her new grandson to the world. She believed she was about to cement her ultimate victory. She was actually about to invite the entire city to witness her downfall. Liam returned to the sprawling estate in the foothills, carrying a weight he could not articulate. The house had descended into a quiet, suffocating purgatory. William was barricading himself in his mahogany study, drinking expensive scotch to numb the reality of his own actions. Olivia spent her days secluded in the nursery, weeping over a child who represented her impending doom. Liam joined this toxic ballet, adopting a hollow silence. He was too afraid to confront his father and too ashamed to look at his wife. They were three people trapped in a mansion, each holding a corner of a dark, repulsive secret, waiting for the floor to collapse beneath them. Cynthia, however, interpreted this collective unease incorrectly. She lacked the emotional intelligence to recognize genuine despair. She viewed their lethargy as a temporary slump, a minor hurdle she needed to clear. She believed they were simply overwhelmed by the logistical demands of new parenthood and the stress of the impending financial disbursement. To Cynthia, a problem was just an opportunity to host a catered event. She thrived in the arena of social orchestration, deciding that the perfect antidote to the gloomy atmosphere was a public spectacle. She initiated the planning for an extravagant charity gala to formally introduce the baby. In standard American suburbs, introducing a new infant to friends involves paper plates and modest gifts in a living room. In the upper echelons of Colorado society, it requires a guest list of 200 investors, a string quartet, and a strategic press release. Cynthia transformed her manicured lawns into a sprawling venue. She erected towering white canvas tents and hired a small army of florists to construct elaborate archways of imported orchids. She intended to use this gala for a very specific purpose. She planned to stand on a stage, present the child to Denver high society, and formally announce the activation of the generational family trust. She wanted the city to witness the undeniable triumph of her bloodline. Her need for total victory demanded one final gesture of cruelty. A week before the event, a courier arrived at my clinic in Boulder. He carried a heavy cream-colored envelope sealed with custom gold wax. I opened it at my desk, sliding the thick cardstock free. The elegant foil lettering announced the celebration of the Kensington heir. Clipped to the formal invitation was a handwritten note on Cynthia's personal stationery. "Evelyn, I hope you can find it in your heart to attend. It is time to celebrate the family moving on. We all must accept where we belong." She sent the invitation as a weapon. She assumed I would read her patronizing words, crumple the thick paper, and retreat into my modest apartment to cry over the life I had lost. She expected my absence to serve as the ultimate validation of her superiority. She wanted her affluent peers to notice my empty chair and whisper about the bitter, sterile former wife who could not handle the blinding light of the Kensington success. She desired an empty seat to symbolize her total domination of my narrative. I did not crumple the paper. I set the invitation on my desk and smoothed the edges with my fingertips. My professional background has taught me to recognize the exact moment a pathogen reaches its peak before the immune system eradicates it. Cynthia was experiencing the zenith of her delusion. She had gathered every lie, every manipulation, and every biological impossibility under one roof, preparing to shine a spotlight on them. She wanted an audience to bless her fabricated reality. I decided to give her exactly what she wanted. If she intended to use a public forum to finalize my humiliation, I would use that identical stage to dismantle her empire. I did not spend the subsequent days shopping for a designer gown or practicing witty retorts in a mirror. I spent the week preparing for a clinical presentation. I approached the impending gala the same way I approach a high-stakes consultation with a hospital ethics board. I needed unassailable proof. I opened my secure digital archives. I printed a fresh copy of the microarray panel I had run for Liam 3 years prior, ensuring the clinical letterhead and the certified digital signatures were crisp and legible. The document detailing his non-obstructive azospermia was the foundation of the diagnosis. It proved he could not father a child under any circumstances. Next, I retrieved the cross-referenced familial algorithm I had reviewed on the day the infant was born. The hospital laboratory generated a standardized summary of the DNA screening, noting the specific 50% genetic match between William and the child. The report clearly indicated a primary paternal link, bypassing Liam entirely. I printed that report on heavy stock paper. I placed both documents into a fresh manila folder. I arranged them sequentially, creating a chronological narrative of medical facts that stripped away every layer of their deception. I highlighted the specific data points regarding the Y chromosome microdeletion and the familial relationship coefficient. I wanted the information to be instantly digestible for anyone who looked at the pages. People often confuse vengeance with justice. Vengeance is messy, driven by anger and a desire to inflict pain. Justice is orderly. It is the simple, uncompromising restoration of the truth. I did not want to hurt Cynthia, William, Olivia, or Liam. I just wanted them to live in the reality they had actually created, rather than the fairy tale they had purchased. I thought about the years I spent absorbing Cynthia's thinly veiled insults. I recalled the dinner parties where she diagnosed my working-class background as a biological failing. She had weaponized my body against me, using my struggle to conceive as proof of my inherent inferiority. She had elevated Olivia to the status of a genetic savior, praising her for providing a legacy that was actually a product of profound moral corruption. They built a towering structure of hypocrisy, relying on my silence to hold the foundation together. They believed my integrity was a weakness they could exploit indefinitely. They did not understand that integrity is rigid. When pressure is applied, it does not bend. It breaks the things pushing against it. The evening of the gala arrived. I locked my clinic and drove back to my apartment. The Colorado air carried the sharp, clean chill of early autumn, hinting at the frost that would soon cover the foothills. I dressed with deliberate simplicity. I bypassed the flashy silk dresses in my closet and chose a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white blouse, and dark trousers. I pinned my hair back into a neat, unbothered style. It was an outfit suited for a boardroom, not a ballroom. I was not attending a celebration. I was attending a deposition. I picked up the manila folder from my kitchen counter. The paper felt heavy, loaded with the weight of a dozen shattered lives. I slid it into a structured leather portfolio, ensuring the corners remained pristine. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face betrayed no anxiety, no lingering sorrow, and no hesitation. The quiet, sterile environment of my clinic had prepared me for this exact confrontation. I walked out to my car and placed the portfolio on the passenger seat. The drive from Boulder to the Kensington estate would take 40 minutes. 40 minutes to cross the boundary between empirical truth and performative fiction. Cynthia was waiting for me under a canopy of imported orchids, holding a microphone and a stolen child, ready to declare her final victory in front of the entire city. She had no idea she had just invited the executioner to the feast. The tires of my sedan crunched over the pristine white gravel of the Kensington driveway. The estate loomed against the darkening Colorado sky, a sprawling monument to inherited wealth and carefully curated optics. Valet attendants in crisp uniforms moved with frantic precision, opening doors for local politicians, real estate developers, and technology executives. I handed my keys to a young attendant and stepped onto the illuminated slate walkway. The crisp mountain air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and expensive caterers. My structured leather portfolio rested securely against my side, a silent anchor in the gathering storm. The grand foyer opened into a sprawling living space that had been transformed into a theater of excess. Twin ice sculptures carved into the shapes of soaring falcons flanked the entrance to the heated outdoor terrace. Water dripped slowly from their beaks, a quiet reminder that even the most frozen facades eventually melt. Waiters in tailored vests circulated through the crowd with silver trays bearing crystal champagne flutes and caviar toast points. The room hummed with the hollow networking of the Denver elite. People exchanged business cards and shallow compliments, measuring each other by the invisible metrics of net worth, property ownership, and social leverage. I navigated the dense crowd, feeling the familiar clinical detachment settle over my mind. I observed the room the same way I might observe a complex chromosomal chart, looking for the anomalies hidden within the pattern. The guests were dressed in designer silk and tailored wool, projecting an image of enlightened sophistication. Yet beneath the expensive fabrics, the primal human hunger for status drove every interaction. They clustered around the wealthiest individuals, laughing too loudly at unfunny jokes, desperate to secure their positions within the hierarchy. This was the ecosystem Cynthia Kensington had mastered. She ruled this environment through intimidation disguised as philanthropy, and tonight she intended to display her ultimate prize. I located the primary subjects of my impending presentation. Liam stood near a towering arrangement of imported white orchids. He held a highball glass, his knuckles stark white against the crystal. The arrogant posture he had displayed at the coffee shop earlier that week was gone. He looked hollowed out, replaced by the vacant stare of a man anticipating a catastrophic impact. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at the bassinet. William was situated at the opposite end of the room. The patriarch stood near the main bar pouring his own scotch, keeping his back deliberately turned toward the celebration he had funded. His shoulders carried a heavy, unnatural slump, betraying the terror festering beneath his tailored suit. Olivia remained seated on a plush velvet sofa across the room, cradling the infant wrapped in a silk blanket. Her smile appeared brittle and forced her eyes darting nervously toward the exits every time the front door opened. She wore a designer gown that pooled around her feet, projecting the image of a radiant new mother. In reality, she looked like a prisoner confined within a very expensive cell, guarding a secret that was quietly suffocating her. And then there was Cynthia. She moved through the center of the room with the predatory grace of a woman who believed she had conquered her universe. She wore a floor-sweeping emerald dress diamonds, catching the light from the overhead chandeliers. She orchestrated the evening with ruthless efficiency, introducing her wealthy peers to the sleeping infant, directing the hired photographers to capture the most flattering angles. She thrived in the center of the attention, feeding on the validation of her peers. It did not take long for her radar to detect my presence. The moment I stepped past the string quartet playing softly in the corner, Cynthia turned her head. Her eyes locked onto my navy blazer. A triumphant, chilling smile bloomed across her face. This was the exact scenario she had meticulously planned. She wanted the villain of her fabricated narrative to witness her ultimate victory in person. She glided across the polished hardwood floor, making a deliberate show of her approach, so the surrounding guests would stop their conversations and take notice. "Evelyn," Cynthia announced. Her voice pitched loud enough to stall the chatter of the nearby socialites. "I must admit I am surprised you had the courage to show your face tonight, but I suppose closure is important for the healing process." I did not shrink back. I met her gaze, noting the flush of adrenaline coloring her cheeks and the rapid, excited pulse visible at her throat. "I find that certain events require mandatory attendance, Cynthia," I replied, keeping my voice level and calm. She misinterpreted my clinical restraint for quiet resignation. A group of her closest associates' women, draped in inherited wealth and cosmetic enhancements, gathered behind her like a loyal court. Cynthia reveled in the captive audience. She signaled to a passing waiter, trading her empty glass for a fresh flute of champagne. She intended to maximize the audience for her final act of cruelty. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cynthia projected, raising her free hand to command the room. A soft chime echoed as she tapped her manicured fingernail against the crystal rim of her glass. The string quartet faded into a sudden, obedient silence. The low hum of networking ceased entirely, replaced by the rustle of expensive fabrics as 200 guests turned their undivided attention toward the center of the grand living room. Cynthia stepped onto a slight elevation near the stone fireplace, accepting a silver microphone provided by the event staff. She surveyed her domain, basking in the concentrated attention of her peers. Thank you all for joining us on this magnificent evening. We are gathered here to celebrate the continuation of a proud legacy. The Kensington name has always stood for excellence, resilience, and a commitment to building a better future. She paused, allowing a polite ripple of applause to wash over the room. She looked toward the velvet sofa where Olivia sat paralyzed in fear. My brilliant son Liam and his lovely wife have given us the greatest gift imaginable. They have provided the next link in an unbroken chain. Cynthia tightened her grip on the microphone. Her tone shifted into a register of saccharine pride, dripping with the poison of her own hubris. In our circles, we talk frequently about the importance of pedigree. We understand that superior bloodlines build superior foundations. When I look at my new grandson, I see the undeniable truth of that philosophy. He possesses the exact same strong jaw and distinguished brow that his father displayed as an infant. He is the spitting image of my beloved Liam. It is a biological triumph, a flawless genetic continuation that secures the Kensington estate for generations to come. The crowd murmured in polite agreement, raising their glasses in a silent salute to the sleeping infant. William, standing at the bar, gripped the mahogany edge so tightly his knuckles turned a translucent white. Liam closed his eyes, unable to witness the spectacle, a man drowning in the shallow waters of his own cowardice. Cynthia was not finished. She turned her body, aiming the full weight of her attention directly at me. The crowd followed her gaze, shifting their collective focus until I stood isolated in a circle of empty floor space. Cynthia raised her champagne flute high. The smile on her face was sharp enough to draw blood. We must also acknowledge the difficult paths that lead us to our rightful destinations, she said, her voice echoing through the silent room. Sometimes we must endure painful errors to truly appreciate flawless results. So I would like to offer a special toast to old friends and past mistakes, to the people who taught us exactly what we do not want in our gene pool. Your departure made this beautiful reality possible. The room went uncomfortably quiet. A few guests lowered their glasses, sensing the grotesque cruelty of the remark. Nobody laughed. Nobody clapped. The tension thickened, transforming the atmosphere into a suffocating vacuum. Cynthia stood on her elevated platform, glowing with the toxic satisfaction of a predator who had finally cornered her prey in the open. She had built a stage, cast her audience, and lit the match. She expected me to crumble under the concentrated weight of 200 staring eyes. She anticipated a display of frantic humiliation. She wanted me to burst into tears, turn on my heel, and run out the front door into the cold Colorado night, forever cementing my status as the defeated, barren outcast. She believed the sheer volume of her wealth and social capital would crush my spirit. I did not run. I stood firmly on the polished hardwood, feeling the smooth leather of the portfolio resting against my hip. I looked at Cynthia, analyzing the frantic, desperate need for validation hiding behind her cruel smile. I looked at Liam shrinking into the background and William sweating through his tailored suit. I observed Olivia clutching a stolen child in a room full of strangers. They had constructed a towering monument to their own vanity, relying entirely on my silence to keep it standing. I took a slow, measured breath, readying the clinical data that would reduce their monument to dust. The silence following the toast felt thick enough to suffocate the room. 200 guests held their breath, waiting for the humiliated former wife to crumble. They expected tears. They expected a frantic retreat toward the valet stand. I did not give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. Instead, I unzipped my leather portfolio. The soft sound of the metal slider cut through the quiet, drawing every eye to my hands. I extracted the crisp manila folder and stepped forward, closing the physical distance between myself and the elevated platform where Cynthia stood. I did not raise my voice. I did not adopt a defensive posture. I spoke with the identical measured cadence I utilized when explaining complex chromosomal charts to anxious patients in my clinic. I agree with you, Cynthia, I stated, my voice carrying clearly across the grand living room. Genetics are fascinating. They provide an unyielding record of the truth, immune to wealth and unaffected by social standing. You place a great deal of importance on the purity of your bloodline. You have spent the better part of 2 years publicly discussing my biological shortcomings while celebrating the flawless nature of your son. I opened the folder holding the clinical report so the laboratory crest was visible to the front row. But science does not care about our public relations strategies. Science only cares about empirical data. I turned slightly, addressing the gathered crowd of investors, politicians, and socialites. 3 years ago, during our marriage, Liam requested a comprehensive genetic microarray to investigate our fertility struggles. He provided a sample to my diagnostic network. I looked at Liam. He was staring at the floor, his face drained of color, trapped in the nightmare of his own cowardice. I shifted my attention back to the audience. The results of that medical evaluation were definitive. Liam possesses a specific structural anomaly known as Y chromosome microdeletion. He suffers from non-obstructive azoospermia. In plain terms, he produces 0 sperm. He is entirely sterile and biologically incapable of fathering a child. A collective audible gasp rippled through the expansive room. The polished facade of the charity gala shattered instantly. Guests exchanged shocked glances, their champagne flutes hovering forgotten in the air. The hushed whispers escalated into a frantic hum of disbelief. The Denver elite thrive on scandal, but they rarely witness the clinical dissection of a peer in real time. Cynthia gripped her microphone. Her knuckles turned translucent white against the silver metal. The smug satisfaction vanished from her face, replaced by a frantic, uncoordinated rage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "That is a lie," Cynthia shrieked, abandoning her cultivated elegance. Her voice cracked, echoing harshly against the vaulted ceiling. "You are a jealous, bitter woman fabricating a story because you cannot stand to see my son happy. You forged that piece of paper to ruin this celebration." I did not argue with her. Arguing grants validity to a false premise. I closed the folder and walked toward a man standing in the front row of the crowd. I recognized him instantly. He was a prominent local judge, a man who frequently presided over high-profile family court disputes in Denver. He had attended the gala as a favor to William, standing near the front with his wife. "I do not forge medical documents, Cynthia," I replied, extending my hand to the judge. "Your Honor, you are intimately familiar with the certified letterhead of the Denver Memorial Genetics Department. You understand the stringent legal requirements for a diagnostic chain of custody." I handed the crisp paper to the judge. The room held its collective breath as the older man adjusted his reading glasses and scrutinized the document. He examined the raised seal, the digital signatures of the attending specialists, and the specific diagnostic codes printed across the bottom of the page. He possessed decades of experience separating truth from fiction in a courtroom. He knew an authentic medical record when he saw one. The judge looked up from the paper. He did not say a word, but he did not need to. He offered a slow, grim nod, confirming the validity of the document to the surrounding guests. His wife covered her mouth with her hand. The confirmation rippled outward, transforming the atmosphere from skeptical disbelief into horrified realization. The medical facts were unassailable. Cynthia watched the exchange with widening eyes. Her chest heaved under her emerald dress. She looked at her son silently, begging Liam to defend himself, to call me a liar, to salvage the narrative she had spent years building. Liam did not look up. He remained frozen by the orchids, a silent confirmation of his own inadequacy. The silence from her son destroyed her final line of defense. The power dynamic in the room inverted entirely. Cynthia was no longer the triumphant matriarch holding court over her conquered enemies. She was a woman standing on a stage, surrounded by 200 affluent peers who now knew her golden child was biologically defunct. The legacy she had bragged about was a physical impossibility. Her entire social standing rested on a falsehood. But my presentation was far from over. I retrieved the second document from my portfolio. It was the heavier stock paper containing the familial matching algorithm from the hospital laboratory. The silence in the room deepened, taking on a suffocating, expectant quality. The audience realized the first revelation was merely the foundation for a much larger truth. This undeniable medical reality presents a significant logical problem, I said, pacing slowly back toward the center of the room. I made sure my voice reached every corner of the estate. The Kensington Family Trust is governed by an ironclad legal clause. The generational wealth cannot be dispersed without a certified DNA screening confirming a direct biological link to the patriarch's bloodline. If Liam is biologically incapable of fathering a child, the infant sleeping on that sofa should have failed the genetic verification process this morning at the hospital. I let the paradox hang in the air. The guests leaned in their minds, racing to solve the biological puzzle I had just presented. The arithmetic of the situation did not align with the narrative they had been sold. A clinical sperm donation from an anonymous source would not satisfy the trust attorneys. I continued detailing the strict parameters of their wealth. An adoption would not unlock the accounts. The child had to possess Kensington DNA. Olivia knew this. She understood that her position in this family and her access to this estate depended entirely on providing a genetic heir. I stopped walking. I turned my body away from Cynthia and aimed my focus directly at the velvet sofa. Olivia shrank back against the cushions, clutching the infant against her chest. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. Beside her, standing near the bar, William looked like a man standing on the gallows, waiting for the lever to be pulled. The hospital laboratory processed the standard buccal swab today to clear the trust disbursement, I stated, holding the second report up for the room to see. The software did not find an anomaly. The system verified that the infant does indeed possess the required Kensington genetic markers. The baby passed the test. The crowd murmured, confused by the apparent contradiction. If the son was sterile, how did the baby pass the bloodline verification? The whispers grew louder as the guests attempted to reconcile the conflicting data points. The system found a match because the trust attorneys did not ask the laboratory to prove Liam was the father, I explained, delivering the final devastating piece of logic. The attorneys only asked the laboratory to prove the child belonged to the Kensington bloodline. They needed a loophole. They needed a source of genetic material that would satisfy the algorithm without requiring Liam's participation. I turned my gaze entirely to William and Olivia. The patriarch and the desperate daughter-in-law were locked in a shared, paralyzing panic. They were the only two people in the room who understood the exact mechanics of the loophole I was describing. I watched their fabricated world crumble under the weight of the empirical evidence I held in my hand. They had built a towering monument to their own vanity, and I was about to remove the cornerstone. I stood in the center of the grand living room, holding the second laboratory report up to the soft light of the chandeliers. The air in the estate had grown incredibly thin. 200 guests watched in stunned silence, their collective attention anchored to the piece of paper in my hand. They were waiting for the final variable to complete the equation I had just written across their evening. When the trust attorneys mandated a genetic screening for the newborn, I explained, maintaining my clinical cadence. They required a buccal swab to establish a baseline genetic profile. That profile was then fed into a familial matching algorithm. The software compares the infant's DNA against the established Kensington markers on file to confirm a direct biological link. It is a standard procedure to prevent fraudulent inheritance claims. I turned my body, ensuring William and Olivia remained directly in my line of sight. William was clutching the edge of the mahogany bar so tightly his hands shook. Olivia had curled inward on the velvet sofa, pulling the silk blanket around the sleeping child like a futile shield. The system confirmed a genetic overlap, I continued. The infant possesses the required Kensington DNA, but the software does not just return a simple pass or fail result. It generates a specific relationship coefficient based on the percentage of shared genetic material. A grandchild shares roughly 25% of their DNA with a grandparent. A parent shares exactly 50% of their genetic code with their offspring. I lowered the document slightly. I did not need to read the words. I had memorized the data. The laboratory report generated this morning did not indicate a 25% match with the patriarch's profile. The relationship coefficient returned a 50% match. I paused, letting the mathematical reality settle over the room. The infant sleeping on that sofa is not William Kensington's grandson. The child is his son. The silence held for a fraction of a second before the room erupted. The sound was not a unified gasp, but a chaotic, overlapping wave of disgusted murmurs, sharp intakes of breath, and hurried whispers. A woman in the second row dropped her champagne flute. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, the sharp noise piercing the mounting uproar. The Denver elite, a group of people who prided themselves on their impenetrable decorum, lost their composure entirely. They stared at William, then at Olivia, their faces contorted in revulsion. I kept my focus on the velvet sofa. Olivia did not stand up to defend her honor. She did not shout a denial. She folded under the immense weight of the public exposure. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic, and she burst into loud theatrical tears. She rocked back and forth, clutching the baby, her meticulously styled hair falling into her eyes. Her inability to deny the accusation served as the ultimate confirmation for the surrounding crowd. The wealthy socialite who had stolen a husband to secure a fortune was now exposed as a woman who had traded her dignity to her father-in-law for a share of a trust fund. William realized the walls were closing in. He had spent his entire life controlling narratives and buying his way out of consequences. Now stripped of his financial armor and exposed before his peers, his primal instinct for self-preservation overrode his carefully cultivated image of a devoted family patriarch. He chose cowardice. "It was her!" William shouted, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at Olivia. He pushed away from the bar, desperate to distance himself from the wreckage. She manipulated the situation. She knew Liam could not provide an heir, and she was terrified of losing her position in the estate. She cornered me. She seduced me to secure the trust disbursement. His attempt to salvage his reputation only cemented his disgrace. The guests recoiled from him, disgusted by his willingness to throw the mother of his newborn child to the wolves to save his own skin. He was not a commanding business mogul. He was a pathetic, terrified man trying to run from a biological fact. Liam finally moved. He did not confront his father. He did not comfort his weeping wife. He simply turned his back on the room, walked through the heavy French doors leading to the outdoor terrace, and disappeared into the cold night. He abandoned his fabricated family, choosing exile over the unbearable humiliation of his reality. My attention shifted back to the center of the room. Cynthia Kensington remained standing on her elevated platform near the stone fireplace. The silver microphone had slipped from her grasp, landing with a dull thud on the plush rug. The woman who had spent years obsessing over origins, bloodlines, and keeping score was now trapped in a prison of her own making. I watched the realization wash over her features, systematically dismantling her porcelain facade. Her entire life was a repulsive lie. The husband she paraded as a pillar of the community had betrayed her in the most grotesque manner possible. The daughter-in-law she had championed as a superior genetic specimen had orchestrated the betrayal. Her beloved golden son was a sterile pawn used by his own father to bypass a legal technicality. Cynthia had built her identity on the belief that her family was inherently better than everyone else. She had weaponized my body against me, diagnosing my working-class background as a biological failing, all while her own household was festering with profound moral decay. She had demanded an audience to witness her ultimate victory. She had orchestrated this lavish charity gala to force the city to bless her fabricated reality. Now she stood frozen under the bright chandeliers, surrounded by 200 affluent peers who were staring at her with unabashed pity and disgust. The public humiliation was total. The carefully constructed performance of superiority she had maintained for decades shattered into unrecoverable fragments. She looked at William, her eyes wide with a horrifying silent comprehension. She looked at the infant sleeping on the sofa, realizing the child she had just boasted about was a living testament to her husband's infidelity. Her emerald dress and expensive diamonds suddenly looked hollow, like theatrical props on a collapsing stage. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. She wrapped her arms around her own torso, shrinking into herself as if trying to hide from the glaring lights of the living room. The towering arrogance that had defined her existence was gone, replaced by the crushing, undeniable weight of empirical truth. I did not feel the urge to gloat. I did not smile, and I did not raise my voice to deliver a final dramatic insult. The science had already performed the heavy lifting. I slipped the laboratory reports back into the crisp manila folder and secured them inside my structured leather portfolio. I adjusted my navy blazer, preparing to leave the estate and return to my quiet, orderly life in Boulder. I walked toward the grand foyer, parting the crowd of stunned guests with easy, measured steps. As I passed the elevated platform where Cynthia stood paralyzed, I stopped. I looked at the woman who had tried to erase my worth with her cruel, calculated whispers. "You wanted to talk about where things come from, Cynthia," I said quietly, ensuring the words reached her ears over the chaotic murmurs of the room. "Now you know." I turned my back on the Kensington estate and walked out the front door, leaving them to drown in the shallow waters of their own creation. The crisp Colorado air greeted me the moment I stepped past the heavy mahogany doors of the Kensington estate. It carried the sharp bite of impending winter, cleansing the scent of imported orchids and panic from my lungs. I walked down the illuminated slate path toward the valet station with a steady, unhurried pace. I did not look back at the grand house, but the sounds of the immediate fallout echoed through the open windows. The string quartet had abandoned their instruments. The polite hum of high society networking had devolved into a frantic, chaotic scramble for the exits. Denver elites operate on a strict social currency, and proximity to a catastrophic scandal is the fastest way to bankrupt a reputation. The guests who had eagerly toasted to Cynthia's superior bloodline mere minutes ago were now fleeing her living room as if the building were on fire. I handed my ticket to a wide-eyed valet attendant. He jogged toward the rows of parked luxury vehicles, leaving me to observe the exodus. Men in tailored suits and women in designer gowns poured out of the front entrance, clutching their coats. They bypassed the standard pleasantries. Nobody sought out the host to offer their gratitude for the evening. They kept their heads down, dialing their drivers and whispering furiously into their cell phones. Cynthia had transformed from the untouchable queen of their social ecosystem into a pariah in the span of 5 minutes. She stood alone in the center of her grand living room, entirely abandoned by the sycophants who had fed her ego for decades. As I waited for my sedan, I watched the silhouettes moving behind the expansive glass windows of the estate. Liam had reappeared in the foyer, but he was not walking toward his mother to offer support. He was carrying a dark leather duffel bag over his shoulder. The golden child, a man who had spent 30 years letting his parents shield him from every consequence, had finally reached his breaking point. The public exposure of his sterility, coupled with the sickening reality of his father's betrayal, severed the fragile strings that held his fabricated life together. He did not stop to comfort Olivia. He did not confront the patriarch who had orchestrated his ultimate humiliation. Liam walked straight out the side door toward the garage, prioritizing his own escape over the wreckage he was leaving behind. Olivia stood frozen near the threshold of the hallway, clutching the infant to her chest, watching her husband abandon her. She had traded her integrity to secure a position in the Kensington Empire, only to find herself isolated in a mansion built on lies, holding a child who represented her permanent disgrace. On the second floor of the estate, a single light burned brightly behind the curtains of William's private study. The patriarch was undoubtedly pacing the perimeter of his office, barking desperate orders at his team of trust attorneys over a secure line. He was a man accustomed to buying silence, but the currency of his wealth was useless against the empirical data I had just entered into the public record. 200 of the most influential people in Colorado now possessed first-hand knowledge of the laboratory results. The municipal judges, the banking executives, and the real estate developers had all witnessed the truth. The biological clauses of the generational trust were irrevocably compromised. William could not seal a leak of that scale. The financial disbursement was dead. My modest sedan pulled up to the curb. I tipped the valet slid into the driver's seat and merged onto the winding road leading away from the foothills. The structured leather portfolio rested on the passenger seat, no longer a container for explosive secrets, but simply a repository for processed medical files. I turned onto the highway connecting Denver to Boulder. The lanes were nearly empty. The rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt provided a soothing contrast to the frantic energy I had left behind. I felt a profound, settling peace taking root in my chest. For the past year, I had carried the burden of their deception. I had allowed their false narratives to dictate my social standing, absorbing the cruel whispers and the condescending pity. I had maintained my professional restraint while they paraded a stolen life through the country clubs. Tonight, I had returned that burden to its rightful owners. I did not feel the erratic thrill of vengeance. Vengeance requires an emotional investment in the suffering of others. It demands a continuous cycle of retaliation. I had no interest in watching the Kensingtons bleed. I simply refused to let my own reality be overwritten by wealthy hypocrites. I had applied the scientific method to a social disease. I isolated the variables, gathered the empirical data, and presented the findings to an impartial audience. The truth did the rest. I arrived at my apartment complex in Boulder just after midnight. The building was quiet, a modest structure lacking the grand archways and valet services of the world I had just exited. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and hung my keys on the hook in the hallway. My living room was neat and unbothered. There were no ice sculptures or imported flowers. There were only my medical textbooks stacked neatly on the coffee table and a simple reading lamp casting a warm glow over the sofa. I placed the leather portfolio in the bottom drawer of my desk. I did not need to look at those documents ever again. Their purpose was fulfilled. The following morning, I woke up before the sun crests the horizon. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee and stood by the window watching the early light hit the rugged peaks of the Flatirons. The crisp morning air filtered through the screen, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I felt incredibly light, as if a physical weight had been surgically removed from my shoulders. I dressed for work, opting for my standard clinical attire, a simple blouse, comfortable slacks, and my hospital identification badge. I drove to my consulting practice parked in my designated spot and unlocked the glass doors of the clinic. The waiting room was pristine and calm, a sanctuary built for the delivery of honest answers. My first appointment of the day was a young couple seeking guidance on a potential hereditary heart condition. I sat across from them in my consultation room, reviewing their genetic panels. They were terrified, holding hands so tightly their knuckles strained against the skin. I did not offer them false hope or performative optimism. I offered them clarity. I explained the nucleotide sequences, detailed the probability models, and outlined their medical options. I provided them with the truth, because the truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a real life upon. Between appointments, my phone buzzed on my desk. Several text messages arrived from former acquaintances in Denver, people who had ignored my existence for 12 months. They were desperate for details, hungry for gossip regarding the spectacular implosion of the Kensington Gala. They wanted to know the logistics of Liam's departure and the legal ramifications of William's betrayal. They were treating the destruction of a family like a spectator sport. I deleted the messages without reading them. I had no desire to participate in the autopsy of their social circle. The beauty of an empirical fact is its self-sustaining nature. A lie requires constant maintenance. It requires intimidation, coordination, and a vast expenditure of energy to keep the fragile pieces intact. A lie is a structure built on a fault line, vulnerable to the slightest seismic shift. The truth, however, requires no maintenance. Once it is exposed to oxygen, it breathes on its own. It does all the heavy lifting, expanding to fill the available space, crushing the fabrications standing in its way. Cynthia Kensington had spent years orchestrating a complex deception, believing her wealth could bend the laws of biology. She had constructed a towering monument to her own vanity, demanding the entire city kneel before it. I had simply walked up to the monument and shown the audience the cracks in the foundation. The gravity of their own actions brought the structure down. I closed my office door at the end of the day, leaving the sterile quiet of the clinic behind. I walked out into the fading Colorado sunlight, ready to navigate whatever the next phase of my life would bring. The dust from the explosion in Denver was still settling, but I knew the shockwaves were far from over. The legal and financial consequences of the gala were just beginning to take shape, and the Kensington family was about to learn how cold the world can be when the performance finally ends. The winter following the gala arrived with a bitter, unforgiving chill across the Colorado foothills. I watched the snow accumulate from the window of my clinic, finding comfort in the quiet, predictable change of the seasons. Down in Denver, the climate was far less serene. The implosion of the Kensington family did not happen overnight. It was a slow, agonizing structural collapse playing out across the front pages of local business journals and whispered over expensive coffees at the country club. When you build a dynasty on a foundation of genetic deception, the resulting earthquake spares no one. Cynthia initiated legal proceedings less than 48 hours after the charity event. She filed for a highly publicized, brutal divorce. The woman who had spent decades curating an image of flawless domestic superiority now dragged her husband and their shared assets through the mud of the family court system. She demanded the Aspen estate, the primary residence, and a staggering portion of his liquid capital. William hired his own team of ruthless litigators. They fought over the remains of their life together with the viciousness of scavengers. However, the true prize they both coveted remained out of reach. The generational family trust was frozen indefinitely. The estate attorneys presented with undeniable proof of a fraudulent attempt to bypass the strict biological clauses locked the accounts. The millions of dollars intended for the Kensington heir became trapped in a legal purgatory inaccessible to William, Cynthia, and the child born of their collective betrayal. Cynthia was left with her pride in tatters, forced to navigate a social landscape that now viewed her as a punchline rather than a matriarch. Olivia learned a harsh lesson about the conditional nature of high society loyalty. The Denver elite, terrified of the scandal infecting their own reputations, severed all ties with her. The dinner invitations stopped. The country club memberships were quietly revoked. Stripped of Liam's financial protection and exiled by her former peers, she was left isolated. She had traded her integrity to secure a place at the top of the hierarchy, only to find herself raising William's child in a modest apartment on the outskirts of the city. Her parents, mortified by the public disgrace, offered minimal support. She was forced to navigate the reality of single motherhood without the cushion of the Kensington fortune she had sacrificed everything to obtain. Every time she looked at her growing son, she would see the undeniable features of the father-in-law she had conspired with, a permanent living reminder of her own moral decay. Liam faced the hardest fall of all. Stripped of his unearned bravado and cut off from the frozen trust fund, his glass-walled technology incubator folded within 2 months. He could no longer afford the bespoke suits or the illusion of being a self-made entrepreneur. The realization of his own sterility, combined with the grotesque betrayal committed by his father and his wife, broke the fragile shell of his ego. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he finally entered intensive therapy. He was forced to confront the hollow existence his parents had constructed for him, learning for the first time how to survive without a financial safety net. He had to learn how to be an ordinary man, a transition that proved agonizing for someone raised to believe he was royalty. 6 months after the gala, a plain white envelope arrived at my clinic. The return address belonged to a modest residential complex in Denver. I recognized Liam's handwriting immediately. I opened it during my lunch break. The letter was brief, covering a single page of lined paper. He offered a genuine apology for his cowardice. He acknowledged the cruelty I had endured and admitted that his failure to stand up for me was the greatest regret of his life. He did not ask for a reconciliation. He only asked for my forgiveness. I read the words carefully, observing the raw vulnerability he had never been capable of displaying during our marriage. I folded the paper, placed it back into the envelope, and slid it into the shredder beneath my desk. I did not reply. Forgiveness is a personal internal process, but access to my life is a privilege he permanently forfeited. Enforcing a boundary is the most profound act of self-care a person can practice. My own life moved forward with a steady, rewarding momentum. My career flourished in the quiet aftermath of the scandal. My handling of the complex genetic verification, coupled with my refusal to compromise my ethical standards under immense pressure, earned me a sterling reputation within the Colorado medical network. I became one of the most respected genetic consultants in the state. I expanded my practice, partnering with top-tier reproductive endocrinologists to guide families through their most vulnerable moments. I built a life grounded in integrity, clarity, and the unyielding strength of empirical science. I did not need a trust fund or a designer wardrobe to validate my worth. I had my own 2 hands, my intellect, and a clear conscience. I found peace in the predictable laws of biology, a stark contrast to the chaotic performative world I had left behind. The truth is a persistent force. You cannot outrun your biology, and you cannot bury the truth under a pile of money. The wealthy hypocrites of this world often believe they can purchase a fabricated reality, manipulating the people around them to maintain their fragile egos. They assume that silence can be bought and integrity can be compromised. But facts do not respond to intimidation. They sit quietly in laboratory reports and diagnostic charts, waiting for the right moment to surface. When you stand your ground and let the data speak for itself, the loudest performers will always silence themselves. I am Evelyn Rhodes, and I survived the Kensington Empire by trusting the science. Have you ever had to use cold, hard facts to silence a bully in your own life? Tell me your story in the comments below. Thank you for joining me on Still Drama Stories, where we know the truth is always the final word.
We spend the majority of our lives building fortresses. We lay bricks of ambition, pour foundations of wealth, and erect towering walls of status, all under the guise of providing a better future for our children. In modern American culture, especially within the fiercely competitive echelons of high society, Success is too often measured by the zip code we secure, the prestigious universities our children attend, and the generational trust funds we establish. We wrap our families in a veneer of absolute perfection. But when the inevitable storms of reality arrive, a fortress built on deception and vanity offers no shelter. The story of the Kensington family, a dynasty that spectacularly collapsed under the weight of its own performative excellence, serves as a devastating mirror for modern parents. It forces us to pause in our relentless pursuit of success and ask a terrifying question: are we raising resilient, honorable adults, or are we simply funding the fragile illusions of overgrown children to build a truly good life? The most permanent foundation we can leave for the next generation is not a staggering inheritance or a curated genetic profile. It rests entirely on three invisible pillars: morality, wisdom, and emotional fortitude. Let us first examine the moral decay that destroyed the Kensington Empire. Cynthia and William believed they were the master architects of a superior lineage. They confused financial supremacy with character, a common affliction in a society that increasingly worships the self-made billionaire and the meticulously curated lifestyle. By using their vast wealth to pave over every obstacle their son encountered, they committed the ultimate parental betrayal. They robbed Liam of the vital, painful opportunity to learn how to fall. The consequence of this blind protection was a 30-year-old man wrapped in luxury, but completely devoid of a spine. When faced with the undeniable crisis of his own infertility and the sudden collapse of his marriage, Liam did not stand tall. He folded weeping into his hands, paralyzed by his own inadequacy, waiting for his parents' checkbook to rewrite his reality. True love in parenting is never found in shielding a child from the natural consequences of their actions. It is found in standing beside them as they face the fire, teaching them to take responsibility. The Kensingtons sacrificed their fundamental humanity, culminating in William's grotesque, incestuous betrayal with his own daughter-in-law, just to preserve a hollow name and unlock a financial clause. This shocking moral compromise did not happen overnight. It was the final desperate act of a family that had spent decades valuing public perception over private decency. We must teach our children early and often that integrity cannot be purchased. A life devoid of morality, no matter how beautifully decorated with imported orchids and designer labels, is nothing more than a castle built on shifting sand. Furthermore, the tragedy of this family exposes a profound lack of wisdom, highlighting the toxic hypocrisy that often plagues our modern culture. The Kensingtons operated in an ecosystem obsessed with outward optics. They championed organic living, environmental sustainability, and genetic superiority, yet their internal world was entirely rotten. Their ultimate downfall was rooted in a fundamental, arrogant refusal to accept the truth. When confronted with the biological reality of Liam's sterility, true wisdom would have demanded humble acceptance. It would have required mourning the loss of a specific future and finding the grace to build a new one. Instead, driven by an insatiable need to maintain their social standing and prove their dominance, they chose to fabricate a grotesque lie. Parents today must instill in their children the courage to look reality in the eye, no matter how deeply it contradicts their desires or damages their pride. We live in an era of social media filters and curated digital personas, where the pressure to project a flawless, enviable life is immense. If we do not teach our children to tether themselves firmly to the truth, they will eventually drown in their own deceptions, just as William, Cynthia, and Olivia drowned in theirs. Wisdom is the ability to drop the mask and live authentically, even when the truth is deeply uncomfortable. Conversely, the quiet triumph of Evelyn Rhodes offers a masterclass in emotional awareness, resilience, and the power of forbearance. In a culture that often equates loudness with strength and views forgiveness as weakness, Evelyn's journey proves that true power resides in stillness. When she was publicly humiliated, betrayed by her husband, and relentlessly mocked by her mother-in-law, her biological instinct, the basic human instinct, must have been to scream, to retaliate, and to destroy them right then and there. She held the explosive medical records in her hands for months. She could have ruined them at any moment she pleased. Yet she did not react from her ego. She practiced a profound emotional regulation, observing the cruelty of her abusers without absorbing it into her own spirit. She understood that vengeance is a poison that ultimately destroys the vessel carrying it. For parents, this is perhaps the most difficult and vital lesson to impart to our children. We must raise individuals who know how to navigate the inevitable storms of betrayal without allowing the rain to reach their souls. Evelyn did not seek to ruin the Kensingtons for the sake of drama or petty revenge. She simply laid the empirical truth on the table and stepped out of the blast radius. She established an impenetrable boundary, choosing not to respond to Liam's eventual apologies, walking away with her dignity fully intact and her spirit untainted. This is the ultimate emotional armor we can give our children, the ability to recognize that you do not need to participate in another person's chaos to prove your own worth. When we strip away the designer clothes, the luxury estates, and the staggering bank accounts, the narrative of the Kensington family is a stark reminder of our deepest responsibilities as guides to the next generation. We must look inward and repair our own spirits before we attempt to mold our children. If we are driven by vanity, if we value the applause of strangers over the quiet integrity of our own homes, our children will inherit that exact same emptiness. We are tasked with raising individuals who possess the moral courage to choose fairness in the dark, the wisdom to embrace imperfect realities, and the emotional fortitude to smile calmly in the face of absolute chaos. True parenting is not about engineering a flawless life for our children. It is about equipping them with the inner strength to survive a flawed world with their humanity intact. If this reflection resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of truth over performance, please take a moment to subscribe to Still Drama Stories. We share narratives that challenge our perspectives and remind us of the quiet strength required to navigate family complexities. As you go about your day, consider the invisible inheritance you are leaving behind. Are the values you preach the same ones you practice when the doors are closed? We spend our lives building fortresses to keep the world out, but perhaps the real danger has always been locked inside with us.